I'm surprised at the lack of AI information here at reInvent. You're watching Techstrong, gang. Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel for Techstrong, gang. No, there is no lack of AI at AWS reInvent. As a matter of fact, it's downright overwhelming. We're going to talk about that and what is AWS reInvent? Oh, excuse me. What is AWS's plans around AI in its many different flavors? We're also going to give you a real update on what the Techstrong folks, as well as the Futurum folks, have been doing here at AWS reInvent. This is a casual, just two-person version of the gang. We put a call out to Silicon Valley and requested diplomatic immunity.
I was wondering where you were going. As I was,
To be able to leave the jurisdiction and come down here to Las Vegas.
It was a jailbreak.
Some would call it a jailbreak. I was trying to be fancy, John.
Okay.
But the one and only John Swartz is with us here live in person at reInvent in our suite at the Wynn. John, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Alan. So I was kind of up in the air. I was good. I talked to the AWS about just showing up and talking to some of their executives in AWS fashion. I don't mean to be rude to the hosts. Sometimes they take a long time to kind of put together their
make up their minds.
Yes,
execute.
And set up their appointments. So I did end up doing that. I ended up coming down here, and I ended up being, as you are, overwhelmed with the amount of AI news. But there are also some other things, not just the news, but where the company is going, and some of the people who made appearances here, which I think is kind of foreboding and maybe presages the direction the company is going in many different areas, not just enterprises, but climate change, future investments they're going to make in some certain startups, and maybe changes they're going to make to the robots, the 1 million robots they have in their warehouses. So,
wow.
So I spent a lot of time roaming and talking to different people to get an idea of what they're going to do in the ecosystem, and their plans, to be blunt, are literally to take over the world in a sense.
Well, it's always been that, though, hasn't it?
Oh, it has.
And that's not new. What I find interesting. Well, first of all, I got to ask you: did they give you the sweatshirt?
They just okay. So can I? Okay. I'll.
Was I going to get one?
So I filled out a survey. The reason why I did that is because I came here at the last minute. I drove, and so I didn't have much of a wardrobe. I didn't have much time or much of a warning from AWS. They told me literally the night before the meetings what they had confirmed. So I showed up, and as my reward for doing the meetings, they gave me this nice sweater, which I will wear today. Maybe give it to somebody else later. It's very comfortable.
It's pretty paler shade of blue.
I had to give an evaluation of the AWS CEO's keynote speech on Tuesday as part of it.
Still gave you that?
And I lied.
Okay.
I lied.
He lied. I was going to say, okay.
Okay. But I mean, so Alan, like for instance, I know you have theories about where this is going. Maybe you want to talk about that first and what AWS is priming to do with enterprises, and then I'll discuss some of the things I came across.
So I sat through the 3 hours of keynotes yesterday, and you and I were sitting here in our studio watching the simulcast of today's keynote. And it was all AI all the time, pretty much, right? But here's the thing: when you look at when you look at a lot of the AI offerings they're building out, they seem to be end user, like consumer.
On the surface, it appears to be.
Nova it's a ChatGPT Anthropic Claude competitor almost, and they clearly positioned because they benchmark.
You know what leads to that conclusion, I think, too, and I think it's a very logical conclusion, is that Andy Jassy, who has not been at this show for 3 years and who's now the Amazon CEO, showed up to
He's the one who did that one, yeah. The Nova. Everything around Q is AI generated. today, Dr. Swami, I forget his last name. Anyway, everything he was doing was AI thing, was AI empowerment. Here's the thing, though. In my best Dr. Evil voice, what they want to do is they want to build their own infrastructure that's, it doesn't have to be best in class. It has to be good enough infrastructure for GPUs and AI and the storage that goes with it. On top of that, they're building their own models, their own AI, everything you need. Not to be an end user to use the AI, though that's what these applications are for. They're not true applications, they're building blocks. It's because their plan to dominate the world is based around being the place to host AI-empowered applications, and they're building these AI building blocks for developers to attach to via API and build tomorrow's AI-empowered applications that run on Amazon Silicon, in Amazon data centers, on Amazon networks.
Yeah, I know that's a very good point. The other thing that was interesting to me is, so you have Jassy come back to talk about Nova, and there is a different end game than from the coverage that we've seen so far, because in a sense we're just covering the news, but we kind of go deeper into it. What was interesting to me is, I think on Tuesday, and I there's so many things that Amazon did that for the first time I'm using a computer on camera. So there's a guy named Benoit Dupin
From Apple.
He's senior director of machine learning and AI. He used to work at Amazon.
Yes.
Apple, the idea of Apple appearing on stage at anyone's event, including a competitor in other areas, to me said a lot. In a sense, he came in to do a testimonial about their the services that they use, or how they use Amazon services for all their products. He went down the entire product line, and also Amazon's behind the scenes role in Apple Intelligence. So Apple uses the AWS chips Graviton and Inferentia for efficiency use, but he also said they're in the early stages of evaluating Trainium too. So in a sense, this is a coup for Amazon in terms of their competition with Microsoft and Google. But you add that with Jassy, and then some of the other things I heard that were not directly involved with the products, and you see this vast, crazy, ambitious plan they have, which is going to be even easier, without getting political like I usually do. But it's going to get easier in the current climate, because one of their antagonists, Lena Khan's, going to be out of the FTC. So they can go full bore. They're going to do it regardless.
Of course, that's assuming that Jeff Bezos crawls his way back into the good graces at the court in the palace.
I think he has made efforts. I think there has been some communication between him and Trump. And I think he's also, given his actions at the Washington Post and not making a presidential endorsements, says volumes. That was the groundwork.
Cost of 200,000 plus subscriptions to the Washington Post.
So be it. I guess if you do the math, though, then look at what they're going to try to do here, right? It made big payoff in the end.
I don't want to go down the whole politic route, but I wonder if Elon Musk doesn't wind up becoming the gatekeeper for the tech world to access.
As long as he's in the good graces of Trump, that is probably the case, but I'm not confident that's going to last more than 6 to 9 months. But that's another story that will eventually.
Really, with two stable geniuses. But be that as I didn't want to go down.
Yeah, no. But I just think the context of what they said. And I'll mention a couple of other things later that they have in mind that they're working on, that all ties together to generative AI in particular. But I think they're going to be even more confident now and more at ease in the climate that they're competing
full speed ahead. But let me give you maybe a contrary thought here. Misery loves company. And both Apple and AWS have been at least perceived, if not in fact, as being maybe laggards right? Microsoft's got their open AI relationship.
Yes.
Google's been all in. I mean, they bought Deep Knowledge or Deep Minds
Deep Minds, yes.
a while ago, and they've got
They're ahead of them. Clearly ahead of them.
initiative.
By the way, I was going to tell you, in Silicon Valley, and this is some insight that I get directly from the companies, they are incredibly touchy about their status and how they're perceived in the AI race.
Yeah.
So clearly they're behind Microsoft and Google. You mentioned Amazon. Apple announces intelligence like a year after everyone else has made their move.
And I
use it.
I've got my iPhone 16 Pro here. I've got the M1 iPads. I don't. I realize it's just incremental. I am on the.
But that's what Apple does. They're incremental about everything, and they popularize something. It becomes mainstream, and then they become a dominant player. So they wait for everybody else to establish the market.
Well, that's the Dell model too, right? Dell doesn't get in the market until it's sizable enough, and they believe they can capture a substantial share of it. But that being said, seeing Apple out on the stage, that was my thought is, hey, these were two, if you ever saw Animal House, right? They walk into the fancy, nice looking fraternity and they say, oh yeah, Lenny, come sit over here. This is Iman and Mohammed and Mordecai. Have a seat and make yourself at home.
And you never see the host again, and they shove them off to the side.
Greg Marmalade's off, with Kitty or whatever her name was.
Yeah, I can't remember her name.
But you know what I mean?
Exactly. There's these guys are in their suits. They're Buster Browns, and their Flounder and Pinto are left to fend for themselves.
The losers.
Just as a side, I know we do this a lot. You and I do this a lot. We do these kind of cultural side swipes.
Yeah.
But that's something. There's a lot of things that happen in that movie that you can apply to everyday life.
No doubt about it.
Life lessons that
The
they all.
genius of National Lampoon.
Absolutely. And in a sense, we have kind of the haves and the have-nots. And I'll tell you, I was talking to somebody who works with Salesforce and Agentforce. So before I was here, I did a story that was somewhat negative about Salesforce and their AI entry. Benioff, he immediately started texting me. And he said to me, you're missing the point. We're not that far behind. We're actually in front. And he would send, and he protested far too much. But I listened to him, and I did a story based on what he told me. But everyone is very, very touchy about it. And I think AWS, if I can take a liberty, do you think in a sense that they announced the kitchen sink strategy?
Oh, I think they've thrown everything
out to make it seem as if they're as relevant as the others?
Also, yes. But look, you're not talking about bad luck schleprock here, right? This is AWS. This is Amazon. They do have the wherewithal and the capacity to rule the world, right? Because they do have the data centers. They are developing and have developed their own silicon. They have developed these.
They are going to wean themselves away from NVIDIA. Among the big three who do tens of billions of dollars of business with NVIDIA,
they will be the first one.
They will be the. I think that's going to happen.
Absolutely. And here's the thing: he said it yesterday or the day before, rather. He said, "We're in the whole industry, not just AWS. Gen AI itself is in its infancy. This is a marathon, not a 100-yard dash, and the first steps have just been taken." AWS is playing the long game here.
They did with cloud. I mean, they've done people would look at them and see this company spending billions of dollars on infrastructure and losing money every quarter.
Yep.
There was an end game. There was a method to their madness, and look where it got them.
Absolutely. And I think that's the
happening all over again.
That's the game. This is a long game. Now, the issue, I think, is AI is evolving so quickly, it's hard to figure out, if you're playing that long game, what's the road look like 5 years from now?
That's always been the problem in tech, though, right? Is anticipating where the market's going to go and spending. How far do you miss? And I mean, that happened with Microsoft, with the internet. It happened with AWS in a sense, to a lesser degree in AI. It's happening with Apple. It was interesting. So when AWS came up with these meetings, so I met with a couple of executives of theirs who run accelerators within the company. One of them runs a climate change accelerator, and she outlined, her name's Elizabeth Kaufman. She outlined a number of things they're doing in terms of battery efficiency, which, by the way, is the holy grail in going back to Silicon Valley. That is the obsession, at least to everything else. So they're working with this company. And the reason why I'm mentioning this, there was another woman who I met with named Catherine Van Nuys, who is the boss of the climate change representative. Catherine runs the Gen AI accelerator. And you know, one of the first companies that they discovered and they decided to invest in was Anthropic. So that was her connection. She said, you know, we started off, this company had only a few employees. We thought they had promise. We have $1 billion, it's like $1 billion fund. We decided to put some money into them. And now that investment, like, it's out $8 billion. Yeah, they just doubled their investment. So,
but here's the thing. Yes, you're 100.
I mean, so they're seeding everything.
Yes, they are. They're trying to, as I think we said yesterday on the gang, they're playing every number on the roulette except 0 and 00. But red, black, they've got it covered.
That's an excellent analogy,
right?
Yes.
But the unique thing, two unique things about AWS and Amazon. Number one, they've never been afraid to eat their young. And Anthropic may wind up being a prime example of this as they kind of cast that to the side as they go with their own, right?
So they have these symbiotic relationships with companies until they become the
symbiotic. Okay,
or
parasitic.
Parasitic's a better word, but they wean or they use, for lack of a better word, use something and run it dry, and then they decide, wait a second, we'll go on our own.
But yeah, we can do it ourselves. So I think that, you know, and Claude's a great product. It may have legs in spite of what Amazon does, but, you know, that's certainly a possibility. The other thing is only AWS can kick off their thing by talking about how deep and great their relationship with NVIDIA is,
right?
And how happy they are with.
And they made an announcement with them right, exactly.
And how happy they are with their investment in Anthropic and all that it's doing in Claude, working in Bedrock, and say all of these things, wasting probably 20 minutes of a 3-hour keynote, and I do mean 3-hour keynote on their NVIDIA relationship, on Anthropic, and then in the next breath say, we're coming out with our own silicon that beats NVIDIA and our own Gen AI that is benchmarked to be better than Claude.
That's the Amazon way. You know, take no prisoners.
No, but it's okay. Microsoft took no prisoners. Right. There was a time Oracle took no prisoners. Right. But they weren't as duplicitous. And duplicitous has evil connotations, but they weren't. I can't think of a less evil.
Yeah,
two-sided, two-faced, but duplicitous. To be your friend here while plotting your demise here.
Yeah,
it's Machiavellian.
It is.
I got every big word I got.
Well, you're a lawyer, so you have an extended vocabulary, much more than that.
It's Machiavellian.
It is Machiavellian, and it's inevitable. I mean, it's happened before. It will happen again as they move their tentacles. You know, they strike these relationships and then they cast them aside. It's almost like Elizabeth Taylor. You marry somebody, you have the husband.
Well, maybe it was King Henry VIII.
King Henry VIII is better when he chopped their head. Yeah.
Well, not all of them. It was died, divorced. No, divorced, died, divorced.
You remember this.
Died. No, there's a rhyme. Divorced, died, divorced, died. Died is not really, you know, off with their head.
Yeah.
Died. And then the last one, he did it.
Yeah.
Annulled. There was annulled, and then one more that stayed on Catherine of Argonne.
In a sense, Amazon's working their way down a list. So this is what was interesting to me too, is like you've got a lot of AI-related conferences.
Yeah.
And the one guest speaker who is kind of growing tiresome is Jensen.
Yeah, he's here.
And he is, it's interesting to see the dynamics play out. I'm sure he knows where this is leading, and they're making their own path to be less
So let's explore that.
to be less reliant on Amazon, Microsoft, and Google eventually.
Well, that's NVIDIA's game.
Yeah.
NVIDIA's game, and it's take a card out of the Microsoft book. It's about the software, stupid. So if NVIDIA says, if we control the software that people use for the AI game, we got them. We got them. Because then we can embrace and extend that software so it runs best
You know,
on our chips.
so one thing just popped in my head. Somebody mentioned to me Amazon's long-range plans, which impact their employees, by the way. So I hear from two different things. I hear theories about what they're going to do with their warehouse control, and I get a lot of messages from people who are organizing as labor representatives against Amazon because they see where this is going. And Gen AI, in a sense, is going to be able eventually, I'm not sure how quickly, but probably sooner than we think, convert most of the 800,000 to 1 million robots that work in the warehouses. They're going to be able to do things like sort through products.
Yes.
And here's what the tie-in that is so creepy to me is that there is a startup in San Francisco I think it's called Physical Intelligence. Bezos is one of the big investors in this company. These are robots that do household chores, like the robot from the Jetsons.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen videos of these things. They sort clothes, they bus tables, and Bezos he's a big investor in this company, and he probably says, "Wait a second, if these robots can do this, think of what they can do at our warehouses."
Oh, sure.
And I remember just going like years and years ago. I went to a place, Fernley, Nevada, one of the first distribution centers. He was there, and I talked to him about what they plan to do, and he's like, the era of robots will come along, and God knows we won't have anybody here.
No.
And I think this is part of their plan. It's going to affect their own people as well.
Whenever I talk to young people, or I was taking an Uber to the airport to come here this week. I was talking to my Uber driver. Told him I was coming out here, and he said, this AI scares me. I said, well, as an Uber driver, I can understand that. Because they're not going to need drivers. He says, yeah, I should have gone to be a doctor. I said, what makes you think a doctor won't be replaced?
Hey, they're already starting that.
Absolutely.
They started down that path with there's a dental robot. I mean,
they've been doing, but here's where rubber meets the road, where the robot is empowered by AI.
You just went right to my point. That's exactly
right now you've got the dentist, the orthodontist, the surgeon.
There's a high-rise window washer in Manhattan.
He's done.
It's the robots. They're already testing it.
Sure. But when you make that robot smart enough to know, well, maybe window washing is a little too simple, but you make that robot smart enough to run a factory or a distro center, you could organize your unions all you want, right? The three of you will sit in the coffee break room because the rest of this plant will be run by robots. And I think that's the game here. I mean, from Amazon's point of view.
I saw something, it's kind of along the same lines. It was kind of this sinister kind of idea that this Department of Government Efficiency, part of the edict is advancement of AI as fast as possible, because here's the thought. If we want to get rid of a bunch of government employees, maybe we can replace them with bots and we become more efficient. And that's
you don't see any irony, though, that the guy running that is the guy who wrote the letter about going slow.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's one of the few guys, Musk was one of the few guys who said we should slow down on this.
Well, that's because it came out that they didn't do what he wanted with OpenAI.
Right. Until he had his own
irony or hypocrite.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So he was trying to slow everything down when he was behind it, didn't have an answer. Now that it's full speed ahead. Yeah, that sounds like Amazon. But I mean, that sounds like Silicon Valley. I mean, we're going to be blunt. We're going to be just
but this
blunt about it.
It's take no prisoners, do what they got to do. And the thing about AWS is, again, the girth of their business matches their ambitions,
Right.
and their ambitions are big.
And the thing, the history with Amazon is they set their mind to something. They destroy industries, and they do it in record disrupt. I think of it as oh yeah, that's me. When I see disruption, I sometimes see people losing their jobs or industries rails. Yeah, they did it to the book industry. They're going to do it to the pharmaceutical industry to some extent. Food delivery. I mean, they're everywhere.
Well, Amazon, certainly. AWS in particular, though, John, I think their game here is that the overwhelming majority of apps that are going to come out in the next 3 to 5 years or more are going to be AI empowered. That's
right.
You know, if you're not building an AI empowered app or modernizing to an AI empowered app right now, you're toast. And they want to be the place for AI empowered apps. You want to go run your Office Copilot or your, something like that? Yeah, go ahead, use one of those other two guys. But if you really have an AI empowered app that you want to run on state-of-the-art AI empowering infrastructure, AWS is the place to be. And if they're making that bet, they've already done their calculations and they know that that's going to be the dominant business going forward for cloud.
Yeah. So when I was talking to the climate change person, in a sense, she kind of is reading between the lines. She's like, we're doing a lot of work in terms of SMRs, like a small nuclear facility. We're thinking about energy consumption. We're thinking about data center efficiency, building out data centers. And I said, well, this is because of your AI ambitions and all the energy that's required. Oh, yeah, that's true. But we also really believe in great ideas. I think these are great ideas that enhance and extend their leadership in this space.
Yes, but their game plan is based upon, I've done VC-backed startups my whole life before starting Techstrong. First rule when a VC is looking at a business plan, is this a potentially big enough market? And can this group, leadership group, can this business model, business plan be one of the top 3 in this potentially big market? If it's not a big enough market, I'm not investing in it. And if I don't think that this particular plan has legs to be a top 3 player in that market, I'm not investing in it. Put that on Uber, no pun intended with Uber, but put that on Uber steroids, the AWS, and they have made that is the market, AI empowered applications.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you did the economy. We mentioned Musk, and there's this fear because he's the world's richest man that he's going to usurp his access.
Well, he did lose $56 billion yesterday.
Oh, he'll regain it.
So,
yeah, but he'll probably regain it eventually. Who knows? But yeah, taking that into account, that's like chump change for the rest of us. But regardless, there's always this fear about him taking advantage of, say, taking more advantage of like satellite deals or defense deals.
Well,
now,
why, Bezos has Blue Origin. Why do you think he's got his knee pads on?
Yes, and by the way,
that's not lipstick. The orange. No.
So the FCC nominee Carr has said there's no reason why we shouldn't extend and expand these deals, satellites, not just to Elon, but to Bezos with Kuiper. And with Kuiper, that's another. So it's a feeding trough, right? And so
life in the oligarchy.
I mean, it's gotten worse, and it just gets continuously worse.
You ain't seen nothing yet.
Oh Jesus! God,
it's gonna be. But again, not to go down that road. AWS, they have done their homework. They're making their bets. And now it's a question of execution.
And I've never bet against them in terms of execution. I have to say something. We go to a lot of trade shows, And usually they're the same kind of slog. The keynotes are getting longer.
Yes.
There are too many breakout sessions. There's too much messaging. They're inundating us with press releases. But I have to say the best organized show by far is reInvent, based on my experience. And one of the things they do that's brilliant, but also kind of creepy, is they have the press room is set up extremely close to all the meeting rooms. So you only have to walk a couple hundred feet and you will be put from one interview to another to another. And if you don't go to that, they'll just come to the press room. I've seen Jassy when he was AWS CEO.
Right.
He will go to the press room, and while the press is eating, of course, he's pontificating, and it's like almost like a sense of brainwashing. As Microsoft used to do that.
Yeah.
So when I worked at USA Today, they would have us come up and visit them for a day. You'd be there from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. back to back to back meetings all day, not a break, no break. You even go to lunch with them, and they will do the same message.
Yeah, I mean, look, let's be fair. They're very tight-fisted on giving out press and analyst passes. But once they give you one, they track how many meetings you go to or you do, right? How many sessions you attend, do you sit in at the keynote? Because, next year for Christmas, they check their list and check it twice before you get in.
They want ROI from your coverage,
right.
and they expect it. And you're right, Alan. It's one of the few places where after a meeting, I get a reminder, oh, we enjoyed meeting with you. It was like a bot. Well, it probably is a bot, but they're just hitting me, cascading me. And I got like 10 messages this morning about every conceivable thing they're doing today. And they repeat things. And you know what? Going back to that Microsoft trip, they got me to the point where I would think in the way they would explain something to me, and then when someone asked me about it, my experience there, I would regurgitate it.
Yeah.
Versus like if I went to Apple and I talked to 5 people, I get 5 opinions. They were all on message, and I think AWS is on message. They got the budget, they got the ambition, they got the machines in place, and I'd never count against.
No, I wouldn't count. I think. You know what? They have a great strategy for them. And like I said, it's about executing, and don't count against them on execution. John, we're about out of time. We have one more day of Techstrong Gang coverage coming tomorrow. We also have some live coverage today, as well as a whole bunch of other content on Techstrong TV. I know you've got some meetings.
Yes, and I'm going back. I'll be back in Silicon Valley for the next Techstrong Gang. I got out. I was like
48-hour pass.
Yeah, it was like the Groundhog's Day. It peaked out.
I know, you have to invoke the 25th Amendment. Who's running Silicon Valley while you're gone?
Oh, they'll do fine without. They do better without me. So,
John Swartz here in person for Techstrong Gang. We are live. Well, we're not live on Techstrong Gang, but we'll be live here today in our suite at the Wynn, covering all the AWS information you need to know. This is Alan Schimmel for Techstrong and Techstrong Gang. We'll see you all tomorrow.
Hello, and welcome to the Digital CXO Leadership Insights series. I'm Amanda Rizzani. I'm excited today to have DMI's President of Managed Services, DJ Orb, here today on our show. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing well. Glad to have you on our show today. Can you share a little bit about your company and the services that you provide?
Well, DMI's been a long-time company, celebrating more than 23 years in the business. Started as a federal contracting-based company, expanded past that, and entered into the commercial and federal sector, really primarily focused on digital transformation. And that's digital transformation from everything from app dev to managed services, managing infrastructure, managing mobile devices, and in turn in that running large scale federal as well as commercial based programs in the industry.
Wonderful. Well, let's get right to it then. Our topic of the day is how to manage this plethora of devices that are all over the place. So, first off, can you share from your experiences and who you work with? What are some of the primary problems that are faced when it comes to managing all these devices?
This is a really great question. So federal agencies primarily operate at scale, right? And it completely unique to their own missions. So really what that creates is specific challenges directly correlated and tied to the mission and the mobile aspect on how they manage those things. They need to secure thousands of devices while honestly being seamless, compliant, and secure, right? So they need to have access to critical data at any time. They also need to have it anywhere. So for them, even today, mobility has become indispensable. It really transforms how agencies are responding in real time, but it also connects remote teams and executes their mission critical tasks more effectively and faster. So to give you kind of an example, maybe, take, for instance, field agents who rely on mobile access to make split-second intelligence decisions or collaboration decisions, which can be different between simply responding and fully delivering on an agency's mission. So it allows them access to data with their devices, no matter where they're at. And to be able to get that data and make split-second decisions are extremely important in most agencies' missions today.
Yeah, imagine even more so within those agencies that they need to be able to respond back quickly and act.
Correct. And, with the more and more design of, federal agencies after COVID moving more towards that remote, but also field agents and different pieces of agencies having to actually react in different areas and different locations, it's become really critical for them to have a secure way to access it. And mobile really brings that secure access capability to them to be able to respond more effectively and faster, really minimizing the timeframes that it used to be in the past when it was more paper driven or more, hey, let me get back to you, or once I get back to the office and I'm able to, get on a secure network. It's really enhanced the ability for them to honestly perform their missions more effectively.
Absolutely. Can you share a little bit about how has this landscape evolved over the past 5 to 10 years or so?
Well, it's funny because I use really weird words, but I'll use that. The federal mobile landscape from basic connectivity has become a strategic powerhouse in how they operate and how they leverage and use things, from cloud integration to enhanced security protocols, and a move to hybrid, right? Work has propelled agencies to adopt mobile solutions that are not only resilient, but also highly adaptive. I mean, it's extremely important for them to have automation, and AI now is starting to play a role in that and how they evaluate AI and how the AI will play a pivotal role in the future, just really enabling more predictive monitoring that anticipates issues before they escalate, right? So mobile's advanced in that piece, giving them that reliability and that visibility that they didn't quite frankly have before, right? I would say another one is security. So today, federal agencies can work more flexibly and have more of an assurance, and that they're more in reach to be able to reach the constituents or even, quite frankly, other people within their mission in order to be able to accomplish things, right? Allowing them to respond in more dynamic environments, and sustain operations in ways that they never could imagine a few years ago. I think it's just continuing to evolve them, whether it be on the defense side of the house and how the military interacts with mobile and how they leverage it, all the way to the assessors and auditors that are a part of the FDIC or any other component piece that is there. It's just giving them a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more communication, and a lot more rigor and access to stuff in order to do things more effectively and efficiently.
So, as we increase the level of these mobile devices and the Internet of Things is increasing rapidly, all these connected devices, is there some security concerns? And what advice do you have for handling those security issues?
I think there's always going to be security concerns in any aspect, especially since the mobile market is not necessarily owned by a federal agency, right? It's all designed and developed by third-party companies, and how it's managed and housed. I think the rigor that the federal government has put on some of these organizations and the powerhouse that the federal government plays in that has shifted a lot of the dynamics of how security can do. Zero trust is a big thing that is continually talked about in the industry. I think more of that zero trust towards mobile and that adoption that gets taken by multiple agencies will help those security concerns. I don't think in any world we'll ever be able to eliminate all security concerns. We could only wish, right? However, what I believe it does do is it's allowed the capability of there to be shifts in even the commercial based market by some of the rigor that the federal government has around security. It's helped organizations, whether it be a carrier or even device manufacturers, to create more robust technology and more stuff behind it in order to create a little bit more higher level of security. So I think security will continue to advance. Once you find one loophole and you fix that from a security standpoint, a new one comes out. But I think as long as we stay attentive on it and, through partnerships and different collaborations, with the federal government and the different security protocols that continue to get released, I think there's always opportunity to improve in security, but I don't think that posture will ever go away. But I would say zero trust is a big one in order to be able to have access to data. I think from a mobile perspective, making sure that your devices are secure, especially with the amount of different types of employees you have and different mantras of how the devices are used within the federal space. So creating secure workspaces on devices where it separates personal from private, right? Being able to control certain aspects of what can be downloaded on a device or what can be removed from a device. As that technology has continued to advance over the years, it's continuing to make a strong impact in how you can really secure a device and the data that's contained on that device. So I think the continued evolution will be something in the future that we'll continue to look at as security as our primary focus and pretty much all we do.
Awesome. So as these agencies evolve and most are probably in some area of digital transformation, how do they handle all the legacy technologies?
That's a tough question, and I didn't really expect you to ask me that one. So in true transparency, I think the federal government has made many strides in advancing. We typically see from a commercial enterprise-based market to federal, they're typically a few years behind, right? In terms of updating technology, enhancing that technology. I think the migration to cloud has really attracted the ability for them to be able to do more and migrate more. I think that continued evolution and push towards more cloud-enabled access versus the traditional on-prem. I think there's components that the federal government has made major strides and I've seen a lot of investment in, which is like ServiceNow and the automation capabilities to be able to manage situations a lot faster and a lot quicker, really living off of that ITIL-based process. I think the federal government, just like even a commercial enterprise in some cases, has a long way to come. I would say that when I first started in this industry, they used to be 4 to 5 years behind. I now see that they're more 2 to 3 years behind in technology. So I look at that as a win, of course. And I look at it as an opportunity for continued advancement. I think continued partnerships with outside companies like DMI, right, allow them to really see what the advantages are of accelerating and finding new ways to enhance their technology posture. In a lot of conversations we have with government agencies today, they are really interested in seeing what the future holds, right? So continuing to show them what's out there, what security components we can bring to it by bringing new technologies that may be more commercially enterprise-based or are built directly for the federal government. I think with the evolution of AI and what's coming out with that and more of the automation that it creates, I think it's going to create a lot more opportunity for more accelerated growth for the federal government to increase where they sit today from that intersection of, outdated technology and what the future can hold.
Absolutely. So looking toward the future, what do you suggest are some things that these agencies might look to doing, or do you know about things they are looking at trying to do within the next few years?
Yeah, I would say the biggest piece is visibility. I think we all think that we have maximized the visibility standpoint of how things function and how things work. I think giving more visible insights, having the ability to understand what's being done. I think even traditionally today, a lot of stuff is still done manually. It's not connected from a system perspective where it's more audited from a system basis. I think the big push that I see is gaining more visibility and understanding what's out there, optimizing their infrastructure to understand where maximized cost savings can come essentially to where they can spend that on more advancements in technology is going to be the big driver I see over the next few years. And I think by doing that and getting that visibility and understanding what's out there and maximize on those cost savings, it'll help them, one, increase the ability to do security, adopt more programs for migration to the cloud, develop new applications with strong security rigor behind them that allow the mobile piece of what the federal government does today to expand, right? Whether that be on defense or civilian or any of those things. I think there'll be a strong push in what we're starting to see a little bit more. I don't know, about 7 years ago, the census did a thing. I don't know if you remember the census, just a real quick story. Census used to do it all by paper. If you remember, there were people knocked on your door. Can you fill out this clipboard? And the census said, well, we have a driver. We have to find a way to automate this. We have all these auditors going out there and getting this information. We need to digitalize this. We need to figure out how we do it. And they moved to essentially the phone, right? And people are doing it on the phone now. And I think that they're continuing to find ways to advance that and make it quicker, right? And I think the more that we see that we optimize and increase technology within the federal government, they'll see how much faster and how much responses that they'll get from constituents in a faster way, right? A clipboard filling something out, that can get frustrating for someone like you and I, right? Like, oh, it's 15 questions. Someone holding a phone, we all know how to tap it really quick and do the survey and get it done. I mean, I think those continued advancements and the continued look that we're trying to drive the federal government to do is look at those things and what are the tasks that you have today that may be onerous? How can we digitalize those tasks, simplify them, and provide access to real data insights that give you insights on how you can evolve and continue to make what you do today more insightful and gather more information for not only your mission, but also for the community alike.
Absolutely. I think that was a much needed move, not only for the efficiency, but because we're a little bit less trusting of opening the door to strangers. So I imagine it was pretty difficult for for them.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, if there was one key takeaway that you could leave our audience with today, what would that be?
You know, the one key takeaway I can probably say is a lot of times we get mixed in this thing where we think everything that we have runs efficiently and perfect, right? I would say the one key takeaway I would say is take a look at what you have today and ask questions about how you're doing it or how are you trying to achieve or accomplish your mission and leverage outside companies or outside perspectives to come in and show a different way on how to potentially do things. Not necessarily to gain more business for companies like ourselves, but to gain more insights on what the future can hold and what's possible and capable. Mobile is something that we all know is not going to go away. So the key takeaway is more embrace it, understand the different components behind it, and understand what you can do from it and how you can leverage it in order to advance, one, your mission objectives, but two, create more efficiency within your agencies.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on our show and sharing your insights.
Perfect. I really appreciate it. It was great talking to you, Amanda. Thank you very much.
And thank you to our audience. Stay tuned. There's more.
This is Techstrong TV.
Welcome, everybody. We're having a great conversation today with Terry Ray. Terry is Data Security CTO and Imperva Fellow at Imperva, who's now a Thales company. A while back, that changed. Welcome, Terry. It's good to be talking with you again.
Thanks. Thanks for having me here, Mitch.
Yeah, Imperva Fellow. I don't remember that part. Maybe you were from Imperva Fellow before, but congratulations either way. Tell us about you, your kind of background and what you're working on at Imperva.
Well, so I live in Texas, and sometimes they just call me an Imperva fella, not a fella.
Just cement or cement, right?
Yeah, no, but my now as you noted, Imperva is a Thales company now. The acquisition closed earlier this year, And so my new role really is about looking at the strategy of data security, where the Cypher Trust Suite, the Imperva Suite, how they come together, how they mix together, and all the interesting synergies that come from that. And then, of course, spending my time talking about the value and the reason why organizations should be doing data security today in these types of conversations here and certainly on the road all the time.
You know, oftentimes we talk about data protection, but data security is a much bigger topic, and that's part of why we're talking about is we have so much data everywhere, right? It's proliferating everywhere. Applications are generating data we don't even know about half the time. It's hard to get our arms around it. More or less talk about the security of it. So maybe the best place to start is, what is the start? How do you get going? I mean, we probably already have tools that can help us do at least a good part of this job, maybe most of it.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, this whole industry forever has been called data security. Data security is a gigantic umbrella, kind of like if you were to say network security. What's part of network security? That's a lot of different technologies. And the same thing is true here in data security. Under that umbrella, and I'm gonna leave out other people could add more things to it for sure, but in my world of data security, as you said, data protection is one of those items. Data compliance is another one of those items. Even data classification and other pieces that fall underneath there are all part and parcel of this umbrella of data security. We just kind of lump it all together. I think organizations traditionally have begun in one of those areas. We see it all the time where someone has a driver of compliance. Well, it depends on which compliance as to where they begin. If their compliance that starts their journey in this is a privacy, a GDPR, a CPRA, or something else, then in that case, probably they're going to begin with the identification and classification of where do they have private data so that they can answer a data subject access request. If privacy is not their thing, if it's public payment card industry, PCI, or something else, then likely they're going to say, well, I still need to find my data, but I know I need to protect. Protect becomes an important aspect here. I need to encrypt my credit cards and make sure they're protected. The point is the journey that people begin in data security for most organizations began in 2003, 2004, or even a little bit before with the advent of PCI and HIPAA and some of these others as their version ones kind of came out. And so you see a lot of organizations today that their journey began with compliance. And I think a big part of maybe what we talk about today is why did their journey begin with compliance, and why is that still the only thing that they do?
Mm. Well, let's go there. I mean, truly, regulatory actions or consequences that also show up in contracts, right? There's sort of long tentacles to the compliance side of it. So sometimes that does prompt us to take action. You know, we need to classify data, get the house in order. But to your point, there's a lot more other things to do. So maybe even if you start in compliance, where is the next logical step? How do you kind of tackle the bigger problem for all the parts you talked about?
Yeah, no, I see this as I'm here in my home office, right? When we build a house, we build the front door because we know people are going to come to our house and visit us. We don't think windows are optional. We have windows, and so we need to make sure we have them there. And I think security has moved away from the perimeter really, but still there's the blocking and tackling of security. In every other aspect of security, network security, endpoint security, and everything else, we wouldn't say that I have 5 networks, but the most important network is network A. I'm not going to worry about networks B, C, D, and E because, they're not the most important network. I'm just going to leave them open. We wouldn't do that. And the same thing is true of antivirus or anti-malware and so anti-ransomware tools, these sorts of things. I wouldn't say that I'm only going to put them on Terry's laptop because he clicks links like nobody's business. We're going to put them on everybody's laptop because I don't trust anybody not to click a link. But in data security, we come to this world where we say, for data security, I'm just going to put my controls on my PCI server because that's where I was told to put my controls. The world of data security is one where someone recognizes, or some way, somehow, they say, you know what, I could do better. I should be doing better. And I admit that I've got SharePoint, I've got OneDrive, I've got all of these other places where my data is located where there aren't any credit cards, but shouldn't I be watching what's going on there? I mean, what else could somebody steal out of my network that's more important than the data in my network? Yet maybe I don't have controls there. And it's not even a maybe. Most organizations just don't have controls around their data as broadly as they do around their network and their endpoints.
Well, you mentioned malware. Certainly, ransomware is going after data, right? I mean, so much of our attack surface is going up at the data, trying to get to that data, whether it's for ransomware or other things. You know, I don't hear that nearly as often. The term ransomware. I think we've sort of got a little bit immune to it. But is that a big driver for stepping out of the bounds of just protecting my credit card data or my healthcare data?
It tends not to be, well, let me put it this way. Ransomware tends to focus on file servers. And file servers already, the primary driver for protecting files is actually security. It's not regulation. It's this weird, split industry of if I have structured data, databases, and I have file servers in the cloud or on-prem. Interestingly, they're very different worlds, and the drivers behind security for each of those worlds is actually opposite, diametrically opposed, whatever. But in file servers, the reason people monitor and quote protect file servers is because they recognize that there is insecurity there. Ransomware is a big driver. We may not hear it as much. To your point, we get desensitized to it. There were some big ones recently, but it's security. But as soon as you shift to the world that honestly most security people, most security experts don't have as much experience in, the databases, all of a sudden security takes a second seat and compliance becomes the primary driver just to do what you have to with compliance. And I think the big factor here is from both a file server perspective, but more so even from a database perspective, the world is changing a little bit to where people are beginning to ask questions of themselves, and their executives are asking questions. Why is it that I can be compliant and still be breached? That doesn't make sense to me. Why, if I'm compliant, am I not doing all the right things? And that's a big question that people are trying to answer.
How much more is needed? What's the gap? How far do I have to take it? You raise an interesting point too of, is it a knowledge understanding gap of why we don't take those further steps of how to secure data better if it's in a structured medium like a database? Is it just a training education, or is it a tools problem? How do you tackle this?
If you ask I'm just going to say a security expert, if you ask a security expert, is one of your primary objectives the protection of data? Is data security important to you? Their answer is almost always 100% yes, it is. Okay, so is a strategy of yours to monitor and protect all of your data? And you'll get a mixed response. Most of the time you'll say, well, that's a strategy, but in reality, I don't have the budget, I don't have the staff, I don't have the skills. There's a bunch of different reasons. They'll keep on making reasons for it, and they're valid reasons as to why I can only do a little bit of this work. I can't do a lot. And so there's always these reasons, and it's actually created a new industry that's bubbled up over the last 3 or 4 years that I think is trying to help answer this question for them and give them finally some tools at their fingertips that they can take and say, okay, quantifiably, I don't have to have my eyes open. I don't need to be looking somewhere else. There are systems that are telling me I'm not doing a good job, or I am doing a good job. And if I'm not doing a good job, what should I be doing to get better?
So say a little bit more about this coming together as kind of focusing on this problem. How is that helping it get better?
So being able to focus on the problem, I mean, first off, it was hard. I think it took too long for us to recognize that the problem is a lack of just awareness of the current status of the environment. That if we boil it down, distill it down to what is the problem is that the people that are in charge, or the people that are responsible, more importantly, for data security, Those people traditionally had no quantifiable metrics to tell them, are they doing a good job or not? The only metric that they had to go by, a true quantifiable annual usually metric, was, did I pass my audit? Right? That's guaranteed to happen. Someone's going to give you a thumbs up, and that person's supposed to be an expert and say, you did a good job. Well, I think over the years that got to be that create this feeling of, well, if the auditor's telling me I do a good job, I must be doing a good job. And the reality is with these new technologies, so these technologies are called data security posture management, DSPM. At the end of the day, this is just about being able to build a map of organizational risk in a way that the data security experts can answer that question. Am I doing a good job? Well, for the whole organization, you get a score, and the score could be good or bad. I mean, there's some numbers and things involved in it, but it could be good or bad. And you can see a trend line. If you're getting better, are you getting more risky, or are you getting less risky based on the work that you're doing? At the end of the day, when a security person comes in or security team comes in and they talk to their leadership, or their leadership says, what are we doing over the next quarter? They want to be able to give them an answer back and say, here are the things we're going to do over the next 90 days. And over the next 90 days, the outcome of that should be, we should reduce our risk a certain amount. And we're going to do that again next quarter, and we're going to do that in next quarter. And I can now have a predictable model of where my risk is going to be. And the expectation is that it's going down based on the work that we're doing. Before you had the ability to model risk in this way, in the configuration of your security assets and the tools that you have and the configurations in your databases and all of this, before you could do all of that, imagine what you might have at your fingertips. You go in and say, well, what we want to do is we want to buy some new products. We want to install them, put them in a few places, but there's no metric to tell you, is it being successful? Is it not successful? Did you do it right? Did you do it wrong? And that's what the power is here, is to be able to finally put a quantifiable model together to where you simply can say, yes, you have 5 things you can do over the next 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever it is. And if you do these things, your risk is going to go down. And then you do those 3 or 4 things, I'll give you 5 more to do, and we can keep on reducing that risk. You'll never get to zero because you're on the internet. It's the world we live in. But we can get that down to an acceptable risk.
Interesting. Part of what you're saying also, I think, tell me if I've got this right, is security people know about risk management. Security people know about posture management. We just haven't been applying that comprehensively to our data. So half of this, we know how to do this in other domains. We just need to apply it here. Now, what are the specific steps that help us bring that security risk down, increase our posture in terms of security around our data, where our biggest threats, et cetera? So that part of it, we know, we've gone through that before. That's something we can apply. We just need to know how to apply it. Am I on track here?
You are. And I think when you look at this new industry of posture management, and I say new, but 3 or 4 years or so, but this new industry of posture management, there's cloud security posture management, the whizzes of the world and those sorts of things. And this data security posture management is really kind of part and parcel of that. I mean, it's just looking at the configuration. Even those kinds of companies that were born in the cloud, they're going to do the same thing for the cloud. What we're finding is a lot of organizations there are the organizations that have been created over the last decade, and they may only have stuff in the cloud, and that's fine. But the overwhelming majority of organizations have a pretty good mix of legacy systems that are still, I call them legacy, but they're still buying more mainframe. It's not legacy. They could have bought one last week and it just installed it. They've just been trying to get off of it for 30 years.
As much as anything, right? They're running a lot of the business.
Still buying more, but it's still there. So all of that on-prem technology, if you will, has to be part of that risk. When you have a bad actor that comes in, they're not deciding I'm only going to go after cloud. There just tends to be a lot of misconfigurations in the cloud because people don't know that, know it as well as they do on-prem. But when you build a risk model, that model has to take into account the entire enterprise, all aspects of the enterprise. And that's what we're seeing now is we see a lot of posture management solutions that spend a lot of time focusing in the cloud, because the cloud is pretty easy. You can download the configuration, you can download everything, and everything goes in. And that makes it pretty simple. It's when you start to make that shift and say, my risk is more than the cloud, my risk is cloud and on-prem. How do I make that equation to find that intersection between these two and build a risk model to include on-prem and cloud? And then more importantly, when we look at posture management solutions, 9 out of 10 of them, if not more, will say, I'm going to tell you where your problems are. And if your solution is just a flip of a switch, I'll tell you how to do that. And I might even do that for you if you want me to. I'll flip a switch for you in AWS or Azure. But if your problem is that you're not monitoring any of the activity going into a database, you have no visibility. Well, you can go collect logs, but you need to put them somewhere. You have to do something with them. Most posture management solutions don't, in fact, actually have a solution. They're posture management information tools. They're going to tell you what you need to go do to solve your problem, but then you need to go and figure out the tools you need to buy to solve that problem. And the analogy that I like to use is I've got a garage full of tools, and you're telling me I need to go buy 2 more tools, or you're telling me I need to get better at the tools that I already have. And all of that's fine, but right now the majority of posture management is exactly that. It is, let me tell you what you need to go do, but I'm not the one that's going to solve your problem for you. You need to either go buy or use other products. What we're seeing in this space now is a little bit of a consolidation where those posture management tools, if you will, are being consumed by platforms, data security platforms. And those platforms might be for files, they might be for databases, that might be for both. And now those platforms typically will have that capacity to say, I can tell you what you have wrong in your environment or how you could get better. And because I'm a platform, I have either the tools readily available for you, just go turn this on, turn that on, do these other things, or I have an ecosystem of partners that we can plug right into the system, and here's your plugin, and go get this done. And I think that's how we're seeing this market start to consolidate a bit, to where data security posture management, which was its own little area for the last 4 years, is now being kind of spread apart, and it's becoming really a feature, a required feature, an important feature in data security platforms.
It's interesting. I spend a lot of time also in the software creation world, and very much the same things happening there, right? Things are moving to platforms where the data that's used across workflows and things like that are consuming data to help you in that process, are integrated in a way from a model to get access to it and leverage it, but also integration of tools and workflows and things like that. It sounds like very much the same thing around data security posture management. I like your analogy or not, your description of, is posture management, that assessment part of it is what I would call, is a feature of part of the overall process. I don't want to get a report. It's like doing a penetration test and here's all the faults with your network, but not knowing what to do about it, other than maybe some basic, what about the things that are harder? What about endpoint protection? What do I do for that? Or what do I do for, data in the data places as you're talking about? So that's much more of a comprehensive platform approach, if I've got what you're saying.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think, we began this conversation about where do people begin, right? And like I said, people begin around compliance. And from my world, while I really am happy to finally have a quantifiable model for what can you do today to get better at data security, the other value there, the other important factor, I think, of just having this model is now, as a CISO, a good CISO, I think a good CISO is the one who has been saying for years, but maybe hasn't gotten any traction, has been saying to his executive staff, we are meeting compliance, but I'm telling you guys, we need to do more around security. Please give me budget and people so we can do more, because I know my phone is going to be the phone that rings when there's a breach, even if that breach isn't on my compliance servers. I know that there are CISOs out there that have been saying this and yelling this from the rooftops, but haven't had proof to be able to hand over to it. And I think this is one of those elements of truth where now finally the CISO has some discovery, some valuable information that they can take and they can say, look, I've got 100 servers, 10 of them, I'm doing everything we're supposed to do, and these have very low risk on them, and we're not at risk of non-compliance. We passed our audit on those 10 servers because they're the only 10 that our auditors look at. However, I just want to be super clear to all the executive staff, there are 90 other servers in this environment that have no monitoring, no cryptography, no threat detection, and their risk is astronomical. It's calculated. It's right here, front and center. They're all bright red. We're doing nothing for them. And you might say, well, why aren't we doing anything for them? And the answer is it takes time. It does take some money, probably takes some people. But if we want to be in business, these 90 servers serve our business. If we want to do business, this is the cost of doing business. So as an executive staff, do we all agree that our strategy is a compliance strategy, which is what we have today? Or do we want to go through a maturity and begin the journey of having a data security strategy? And this finally gives them some ammunition to go back to that executive staff and say, here's what we need to do. Here's what we need to get if we need to get anything. And in 3 months' time and 6 months' time, I'm going to come back to you and I'm going to show you how we've reduced this risk. And we'll continue that journey until it's on down. Do we all agree? And finally, I think you'll be able to get some buy-in and they can move the needle on data security.
And it's quantifiable. I can show you demonstrating where we were, where we are today because of these steps that we took.
That's right.
It's not just more money poured into it. We think we're doing better.
Yeah, I mean, it can, I get it from an executive. I remember once I was in our executive staff and our CISO came to us and said, guys, we're a 7. We're like, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. Help me out here. Right. And so even back then, and this was 7 or 8 years ago, they had some capacity to build some kind of a metric, but they didn't have the context around it to talk about the difference between compliance and regulation and security and all this. And bringing all of that context in allows them to really have an effective story that, you know, I'm excited about. And I think it's something that's whole industry, because we're not the only ones. There are other technologies, but fact is this industry is growing rapidly, and I can only see that this technology finally is going to accelerate that process of the companies that I've worked with for the last 21 years at this point. Finally, will start that move from compliance to security.
Very nice. Well, tell us a little bit, how can folks get a hold of you or get a hold of the right person at Imperva to help them understand how to take these next steps? And
Yeah, no, I mean, so as part of Talus now, you can certainly go to Talus and find Imperva in that portfolio. Imperva.com still exists. Come on over to Imperva.com. We've got all the appropriate information there and everything that you could have there. Always reach out to us if you've got those questions. We put out lots of videos like this, lots of information, lots of data portfolio of different documents and things and white papers. We're constantly trying to be a thought leadership organization, share what we learn as we learn it with everyone. So, you know, join our feeds, look at our blogs. All the standard stuff is certainly there, but in short, Imperva.com is a great place to go.
And the good thing is we're talking about this, and there's hope. You know, you have some ability to move forward now. Maybe all that, you know, waving hands and screaming, and, you know, we need to do something. Now we can do something about it.
Merry Christmas.
Hey, and happy Thanksgiving. All right, Terry, it's been fantastic talking with you. And we hope folks will definitely check out Imperva. You know, they work with very large financial organizations, enterprises, et cetera. So, you know, we're talking about folks that know what they're doing. Thanks again, Terry. We'll talk again soon.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Christian Rodriguez, who is Field CTO for the Americas for CrowdStrike, and we're talking about cross-domain attacks and the signal and the noise, and it's just getting harder to figure out exactly what's going on in the land of cybersecurity. Christian, welcome to the show.
No, thanks for having me, Michael.
I think everybody is kind of sort of struggling with the same thing. We are picking up all kinds of signals through our systems, but we don't know how to make any sense of it so that we can respond in time before the attack actually hits us. I think AI has helped us a little bit in that in the future going forward, but what's your assessment of what is our maturity in cybersecurity these days, and what are people getting right, and what do they need to work on?
Yeah, I think great question. I think one of the issues is, companies invest in a lot of different tools, and each of these different tools have, disparate sets of data that they bring to the attention of defenders. And, more data doesn't necessarily mean easy. More data means more data. And to your point, you can really get lost in that, especially when you are, experiencing this UI whiplash of hopping from screen to screen, trying to make sense of it all and trying to tie it together. And I think as adversaries become a lot more sophisticated in their approach to targeting their respective victims, they are adopting, a multitude of ways and approaches to get into these environments versus, kind of the olden days of, I have all my assets behind a firewall and I can kind of focus on a very specific set of my environment to get visibility. I think the approach of an adversary kind of targeting so many systems, makes it very difficult for defenders to start to understand how to prioritize what events to look at. And because of that, because these attacks are so multifaceted and defenders have to invest in so many different technologies, it becomes a bit of a challenge to get your arms around, what data you should start to prioritize looking at, or even just tying that data into a narrative that helps you understand the motivation and the tradecraft of these adversaries.
And that tradecraft seems to be evolving because, for lack of a better analogy, I feel like it used to be more smash and grab, and now they're kind of breaking into systems and staying around for a long time and seeing how everything works before they're there. In theory, they shouldn't be giving off signals that it makes it possible for us to detect that, but what's the challenge?
The challenge is these adversaries are logging in with legitimate credentials, right? And they're emulating the behavior of like an administrator or a normal user. We have plenty of reports and evidence of adversaries simply, using an account of a user or an admin where they log onto a system and they start to use tools that are inherent to the operating system to kind of mask their efforts, right? And that's kind of hard to, the days of using just malware, I don't want to say they're gone, but they're a little less prevalent, right? Where an adversary logging in with a legitimate account or a legitimate identity can start to move laterally in a way that is a lot harder to capture if you're not looking for very specific types of tradecraft and activity.
Do you think the bad guys are kind of, I don't want to say they're laughing at us, but maybe they're slightly bemused because we spend all this time trying to defend against these sophisticated attacks, and they're basically like, guys, you left the key under the doormat and I just got all the credentials and away we went.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they're necessarily laughing, but I know that they are walking through their victims' environments a lot more unhindered versus, the efforts in the past that were initiated with like malware, for example, right? I think that's, again, malware isn't going away, but it's just not being seen as an entry point as much as we've seen in the past. We've had, evidence of a major increase in the amount of access brokers, for example, selling legitimate credentials in these underground forums that, again, to your point, make it very easy for these adversaries to kind of simply just walk in through the front door without being questioned or challenged, right? Or circumventing ways to be challenged. And then there are, plenty of brute force attacks that adversaries have been using to, again, gain access to these credentials and these identities so that they don't have to drop malware and bring awareness to their presence. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. I think these adversaries are just becoming a lot more effective at using identities as this kind of compromise point or this initiation point in order to further their attacks for, motivations that can lead anywhere from or start with exfiltration of data or even more destructive based attacks.
And we reached some point where maybe we realized that we cannot succeed without some help from AI in this space. I kind of feel like we went from a high degree of skepticism of AI to suddenly I don't want to do this job without it.
Yeah, I mean, I think AI can be a bit of a double-edged sword, right? I think the AI is there to act as almost an assistant. I would say that AI can help you get to answers faster. You know, what we're really talking about, everything you're describing kind of leads to this velocity issue, where if the adversary is logging in with legitimate credentials, and once they're on a system, they're very pervasive and they're moving laterally, and their breakout time, for example, is increasing. We published a report this year that highlighted an average 62-minute breakout time, basically representing the amount of time it takes for an adversary to move laterally from the actual initial point of compromise or a system being compromised. And so I think AI helps with that timing, right? In terms of understanding things like anomalies in the way that users authenticate to different systems or the resources that they're requesting once they have authenticated successfully. I think AI isn't meant to necessarily be this mental prosthesis, right? Where you become solely dependent on it to get your answers. I think it can help streamline answers and responses and workflows in an effort to get your arms around, known tradecraft and known behavior, creating automated ways to respond to it and helping you threat hunt a lot more efficiently. But AI, I think, is just another tool in your toolbox of capabilities that you want to implement into your threat hunting program and your remediation strategy to help reduce your mean time to detect, your mean time to remediate, and at the end of the day, stop an attack from happening.
So have we gotten to the point where now we're measuring responses in seconds because time is of the essence? And maybe if I think back to threat hunting a few years ago, it will be by comparison feel like a leisurely sport.
Yeah, I don't know. A leisure sport. I think a bit of a stressful one too. Yeah, I think I think what we're seeing is when you're in threat hunting, historically, you've had these three major approaches, right? You're looking for outliers, you're using atomic indicators, and then you're almost creating this kind of like hypothesis statement that you're chasing of, if I'm a bad guy, what would I need to do in order to gain access to the system, stay persistent, and then kind of run through that entire, kill chain, if you will. And I think AI can absolutely help with that. With respect to how do I start to identify outliers in my environment? If I start understanding application behavior better, that will help me understand anomalies in the way that that application behaves moving forward. If there's something that an adversary is taking advantage of, or if I'm seeing authentications and I'm trying to get acclimated with the way that my users authenticate in my environment, and all of a sudden this user that is authenticating to the system from Jacksonville, Florida, suddenly seconds later tries to authenticate to that same resource, another resource from like Oxford, for example, like that should ultimately be driven by some additional, intelligence to say that's not right. There's no way that this user can travel that quickly, or there's no way that this user who's accessing or requesting access to a resource after they successfully authenticated, if they're requesting a resource that they historically haven't, or they're trying to do something within that resource that seems anomalous, I can actually start overlaying AI to help me make a better decision on the likelihood of that attack activity being malicious, right? But more importantly, I can even start to tie this story together to say that I've seen this authentication, I've seen that this user is coming from a resource like an endpoint, and maybe they're requesting access to a server, and now they're on that server now getting data ready. And maybe that server's in the cloud and there's certain misconfigurations around that. I think that entire ability to take all of these four disparate, data sources, right? And resources that are providing data and events, if I can take that telemetry from all of them and start to apply logic and AI across that, so that in terms of patterns and baselining and even outlier identification, I can use AI to help me make a better and faster decision on what is normal, what is suspicious, and what is truly malicious by mapping that back into tradecraft that I've observed historically, and then evolving tradecraft that we're actively observing.
So do you think it's becoming more stressful to be in cybersecurity or less? And I asked the question because the more is it's in real time, and the less is it seems like I got better tools to discover all this stuff, so maybe I got a fighting chance.
Yeah, I think stressful is a bit subjective, right? Depending on the industry that you're in. Like even within cyber, I think that the adversaries aren't slowing down. I mean, we've seen I think AI can help take a lot of the rudimentary things that we've been kind of tightly wound about as defenders. And so even if we're talking about kind of basic threat hunting capabilities and skill sets that we need, I think that AI is absolutely going to help augment those efforts and simplify some of those efforts so that we aren't having to deal with certain mundane and very routine tasks. I think we can hand a lot of that back to AI. I think when we start to really dig into what does evolving tradecraft look like, what am I dealing with if there's a nation state in my environment that is very well resourced and has the abilities and the capabilities and the skill sets to live in my environment or take advantage of certain protocols that historically we haven't seen exploited, or to leverage supply chain attacks in an effort to gain access to not only my environment but like my business partners' environments. I think AI is going to help us again get rid of some of the very rudimentary tasks so that we can start to focus and even leverage AI to augment our efforts to hunt within those more complex types of campaigns. And so I don't know if that's necessarily something that reduces stress. I think if anything, it creates a heightened awareness. I don't think there's a concept of sitting back and resting on our laurels, hoping that AI is going to be the final answer. The bad guys get smart, right? And there's a human behind that keyboard, and humans are very persistent, and AI is also helping the bad guys at the end of the day, right? AI is being leveraged for very nefarious purposes as well, and I think that if it's going to make a defender's life easier, it's also going to make the bad guy's life easier.
I heard somebody kind of describe cybersecurity once as it's kind of like being in the army, long periods of boredom punctuated by sheer terror. And I'm asking this question because I'm wondering if it can reduce the burnout rate that we see in cybersecurity. And one of the challenges, we talk all the time about how there's not enough experts out there and not enough people in the field. But part of the problem too is the folks in the field burn out.
Yeah, they burn out because the bad guy just has to be right one time, right? And the defender has to be right all the time in terms of protecting the organizations that they're responsible for. And that could be if you're under-resourced and understaffed, that can be a lot, right? And I think as a community, there are plenty of services out there that can help bring together, kind of this community perspective into like what else is happening out there. I don't think it's necessarily something that defenders should feel that they're alone. Right. It's not a job that should necessarily be isolating. I think this is a job that basically should bring, regardless of who you work for, if you're defending against nation state actors and e-crime actors that, have major implications with respect to the damage of their attacks being successful. I think there's so much opportunity that we have as a cyber community to come together and not only share intelligence, but share experiences, right? And, an AI, it can absolutely be even kind of a focal point for a lot of that, that kind of bringing that community together, because there could even be ways where one organization is leveraging AI in a creative way that, maybe organization A leverages it really well, and organization B doesn't. And if they start sharing some of those use cases, I think that actually takes a little bit of that stress off of that burnt out defender to say, oh, wow, I never thought about using AI in this capacity, for example. And I think there's the opportunity if we're talking about the people aspect of working in cyber. Yeah, I think there's plenty of opportunity for collaboration, right? And that includes sharing experiences, sharing how they're using AI creatively, and then sharing, even just challenges, right, on, the resource constraints. Because I think, the more that folks talk about some of these issues, the more I think that you'll start to see better collaboration, even across the vendor side.
So ultimately, what's your best advice to folks when they're trying to deal with this massive amount of data? It's near real-time response, and the game has certainly changed. So what are I going to do to stay relevant?
Yeah, I think we're always big proponents for people, process, and technology, and intelligence kind of sitting at the heart of that paradigm. But I think when we start to look at this picture of, okay, as earlier described, we have all of these different data sources that are disparate, and we have this UI whiplash experience of hopping from screen to screen, and we have no real way of even understanding how to prioritize things like patching, right? I think the first goal is to start to look at what are my data sources that help me dictate what a true positive is when I'm doing my response and when I'm doing my triage and my threat hunting. And if I can start to get a better understanding and the handle of out of the 50 or the 25 different data sources that I'm taking into a log aggregation tool, for example, if I can take like the top 6, right, and start to hone them into what helps me get to identifying a true positive the fastest, right? So they can start building workflows and using AI to help me dictate what my response action plan is, how to threat hunt across that data, how to actually correlate the fact that someone logging in from, or using an authentication or using credentials on one system is also has its ripple effect across cloud services and maybe, on-premise systems or virtual systems, aggregating that data in a place where I can quickly scope out what is relevant across those 6 or 7 data sources. I think that is actually a really quick way to start getting a little more sleep, because now you have a lot more high fidelity signals, right? We talked about, you used the term signals earlier, the high fidelity signals going into a tool set that can correlate all that information very, very quickly, so that I understand that an endpoint is impacted by this identity. This identity also accesses these cloud resources. These cloud resources also have these misconfigurations. These misconfigurations lead to these vulnerabilities. That is a story that helps me as a defender understand very quickly where I need to start my threat hunting, when I can end it, and ultimately what is a true positive. But if I'm now chasing 20 different data sources and trying to build a correlation manually, or even adding AI to that, the 20 data sources, that's still 20 different data sources that I need to parse through and understand contextually if they're relevant. When at the end of the day, understanding what an adversary's tradecraft is, how that maps to something like a framework like MITRE, for example, then applying controls around that in a way that doesn't require me hopping from screen to screen to screen. I think that, if we're talking about how do we reduce stress and how do we start to leverage AI and how do we start to simplify, getting our arms around this very data disparate problem that a lot of enterprises have, I think it's going into a technology or a platform or a framework that allows you to take those very high fidelity data sources and contextually have workflows and actions that you can build around it as quickly as possible.
All right. I think Christian has come up with a new KPI here for security. It all comes down to how well you sleep. So maybe we'll measure those pleasant dreams and see how it goes from there. Christian, thanks for being on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
All right. And back to you guys in the studio.
Hi, my name is Darren House. I'm the CTO of Techstrong Cloud Company, and I'm really glad to be here to talk to you about the secure by design principles and cloud native and DevOps. So we're just going to dive in. So I'm going to be covering the role of architecture of systems secure by design and default, talking about how serverless designs can align with the concepts of bookends. And then I'm going to share some real world examples about the importance of the architectural perspective. But at the same time, I really want you to consider a couple things while we're talking about this. The first thing is I want you to consider that architecture plays a crucial role in enabling secure by design principles, especially when we're talking about cloud. There needs to be a serverless shift in the traditional 3-tier model, and this becomes a very important part of how we look at architecture today. And last, I want you to really consider that secure by default and by design architectures using serverless technologies, they really can minimize the cognitive load and firefighting for all teams across the board. So first, let's talk about a couple of definitions, right? So I mentioned architectural perspectives. So these basically take the whole of business view to try and align technology and design and implementation along with business outcomes. And that's really what I'm talking about when I say the architectural perspective is taking that whole of business perspective. Now, I'm also going to be mentioning secure by design a lot. So what is secure by design? Well, it was created by this organization called CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which is a part of the Department of Homeland Security. And I really just want you to think about the secure by design as CISA's extension to shift left, but from a broader industry-wide product and application perspective. Now, there's a lot of principles that are involved in the secure by design framework, but I'm going to focus on 3 of them today. So the first one is that end users really should not be responsible for product security. The second one is that we as an industry, we have to get better at reducing vulnerabilities, and we have the ability, we just have to do it. And number three is we should be able to improve product and application resilience to cyber threats. So I really encourage you to check out the CISA's Secure by Design website for yourself, read their white paper. It's really good information. But moving on, I also talked about the term cognitive load. I'm pretty sure everybody has heard that term. It's just basically the mental effort that it takes to process and perform tasks. And it's something that's growing in a lot of the domains like security and DevOps and multi-cloud and you name it. There's just a lot of growth in this cognitive load that we all have to deal with. And oftentimes we have to synthesize and make really good choices about technology, oftentimes with really limited information. And that just exacerbates that problem. But altogether, I just want you to understand that the architectural perspective using cloud-native serverless capabilities can simplify CISA's Secure by Design goals. And it does that by abstracting infrastructure management. It does it by automatically applying security best practices, which are often considered secure by design or secure by default. It also can help reduce the attack surface and also can reduce or minimize product and application exposure to vulnerabilities. So these are big deals. So let's talk about the concept of bookends. And with serverless, I find this concept really helps to simplify these conversations. So it doesn't matter, developers, architects, infrastructure, or security ops teams, they all have the ability to start aligning on balancing cost and risk using minimum and maximums, right? And those are the bookends I'm talking about. So for example, if you have to design a new web app or a product, there's going to be a lot of complexity, especially trying to figure out the specific performance requirements. And these can impact the technical design and the trade-offs that you have to make for each component and each tier of that 3-tier web application. And because it's going to be a new application or product, oftentimes you're going to have no data, you have no baselines. So you don't know what the application is going to require. So you have to start inferring things, but you really don't know. So the ability of using serverless and being able to do bookends with minimum and maximum parameters, it really can help you manage your cost and risk on the serverless side. It can also simplify this so you can make assumptions and even hedge your bets on the risk and balancing performance and resiliency while also limiting unexpected costs. It also can help you make faster decisions and reduce a lot of that operational risk by focusing on those minimum and maximums and thresholds that you measure. So before we dive into the details of serverless and bookends, we need to do a quick refresher about the traditional 3-tier web application architecture. That's what this is displaying here. It's the presentation tier. You're typically running on Nginx or Apache, and they're running on Linux or Windows boxes. You're handling inbound, outbound requests. You're handling how those requests are handled. You're managing security a little bit for that front end, ensuring just basically the smooth operation of that front end of the application. Then you have the application tier where all of the business logic is handled and processed. And this typically will use Java-based servers like Apache Tomcat, JBoss, or .NET servers like IIS or using Node.js, for example. And then those will usually communicate with that data tier as well that stores and manages that business critical data that's in there using relational databases like SQL or NoSQL databases like MongoDB and Cassandra or file and object storage solutions. So this is just a high level view of that 3-tier architecture because we're going to compare that to the serverless architecture and talk about the values that you can get from serverless that you don't get from this traditional architecture. And one of the things I really need you to understand is that with this traditional 3-tier architecture, there are going to be these common design, configuration, scaling issues that you just can't avoid. One of those is going to be operating system security, operating system hardening, the patching for the operating system and for the application, the whole vulnerability management program that you have to manage all that, the agents that you have to deploy and manage, the compliance requirements that you have for configurations, the scalability and backups, all these things that you have to manage, these all increase that cognitive load that are required to deploy a lot of apps and products. Now, even if you standardize on the hardware and the operating systems and applications or between the tiers, you're still going to have to deal with a lot of these complexities. Now, when we look at it from the serverless side, right, the cloud native serverless side, this is a 3-tier model. And here we're using the AWS environment as an example to describe this. And I need you to understand here that you still have the same functions that you perform in each tier, but now you're dealing with the actual cloud services that deliver a lot more secure by design and default values than you do from the traditional architectures. So in the presentation tier, you have requests that are going to be first handled by CloudFront and S3, which can scale massively with no or minimal configurations. And then it reaches down to the app tier for dynamic requests that get routed from CloudFront to API Gateway, which will then manage those app routes to different Lambda functions that perform application tasks. And typically, those will result in reading and writing to and from data stores like Overworld Service V2 or DynamoDB or S3 buckets. And there's a lot of benefits over the traditional design. And I'm going to dive into the details specifically for each layer on the next couple slides. But I just want to give you a high-level view of the things you can offload from your cognitive plate, as I like to call it. All operating system security, hardening, and patching gets offloaded because the serverless capabilities are managed by the cloud provider itself. That is a huge benefit alone. All those operating system security and hardening and patching requirements. There's a big majority of the vulnerability management tasks that you can offload. Now, yeah, you still have to manage some runtime and dependency vulnerabilities, but that's a small subset of that larger vulnerability management tasks that you have. There's no more installing or managing agents. And all this becomes a significant cognitive reduction in your cognitive load due to these practices. In addition, compliance frameworks. There's a lot of work that you have to do for compliance frameworks that you can offload because you're using serverless services. And we'll dive into that much more in the next couple slides. So let's go ahead and dive in for the presentation tier, right? So in this one, we're talking about CloudFront and Amazon S3 buckets. And I'm going to be focusing on a couple of the security, design, and default features that are included with serverless that will come either at zero or very minimal configurations. And I want you to understand that this diagram, it's categorized using the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And MITRE ATT&CK is basically a globally accessible knowledge base for adversarial tactics and techniques that are based on real-world observations. So this gives you that indication of what you get out of the box that is secure by default and secure by design based off of industry observations of what attackers do. So the first one here is SSL TLS encryption. This is a simple checkbox that mitigates technique 1557, the man in the middle, where with CloudFront, it's easy that all sessions can use HTTPS connections of the latest TLS protocols, and it prevents eavesdropping. It prevents man-in-the-middle attacks, and it can prevent sensitive information from being intercepted. The next one down is field-level encryption. This can be configured in CloudFront so that you can encrypt your fields before they get forwarded to the origin. Now, this mitigates the technique 1213, and it does it by adding this extra layer of security for sensitive data that is protected, even if that origin gets compromised, because it gets encrypted at the CloudFront layer. So when it's on your origin, it's already encrypted. The third one is custom HTTP header requests. You can use that to send your origins, and this allows you to validate requests and mitigate 1590 by preventing direct access to the origin. And it also helps you obscure a lot of information about the backend infrastructure. So on the right-hand side, we have a little bit of information about the compliance pieces. And it's important to understand that just by using these services, when done right, using best practices, you could typically transfer up to 70 to 80% of your compliance efforts to the cloud provider. And this is because that provider already has attestations for these common frameworks like PCI and like HIPAA and SOC, CIS and FedRAMP and more. But using serverless means you get to inherit what the cloud provider has already done, so that gets off your plate. And that is a huge benefit for you. So now let's go to the application tier. And again, we're going to be focusing on a couple of the secure by design and default features included with serverless that have either zero or minimal configurations, and focus on the MITRE ATT&CK framework to provide information about that. So with API Gateway, you can do rate limiting for request quotas, and you can do throttling of limits, and that can help mitigate T1499 that's focused on denial of service and distributed denial of service tax. These are easily done with checkboxes for the most part. API Gateway can offer input validation and request filterings to mitigate 1190 that can validate requests and reject malformed or potentially malicious requests. Another big benefit for you that provides secure by design and secure by default. Lambda provides automatic patching of runtime environments against known vulnerabilities, and that mitigates 1190. And this is a huge transference of your risk and work on your plate. And the question I have to ask you is, well, why would you keep this on your to-do list when the cloud service provider has already perfected the art of this? Get rid of it so you don't have to worry about it and focus on value in your organization and your applications. And again, compliance, when you use these things, when done right, you can transfer 70 to 80% of the compliance efforts to the cloud provider. So let's look at the data tier. We're talking about Aurora Serverless version 2. This natively provides encryption at rest, mitigating T1552. And this can protect you from any credentials or other sensitive data that might be stored in your databases. And not only does it encrypt that database, but it also encrypts backups and snapshots using AWS KMS. And like Lambda, Aurora also provides automated patching, which will take care of T1190 that will reduce the exposure to known vulnerabilities. And these can potentially eliminate classes of vulnerabilities from your workload. Again, a huge benefit from the vulnerability perspective. And S3 as well, it natively supports encryption at rest. So you can basically do a checkbox to require encryption for your S3 buckets. And it makes it simple and it aligns with those secure by design and secure by default principles. So let's take a little pause and consider some of the small ways that you can reduce firefighting and cognitive load with a serverless shift in a 3-tier architecture. Now, this table that I'm showing here, it's a very small part in a much larger secure by design picture of eliminating classes of vulnerabilities like unpatched software. So let me ask you a question. How many tools and systems do you have in place to manage and deal with vulnerability management in your environment? I'm assuming it's a lot. And each one of those becomes more and more complex, and that adds to that cognitive load. And let me ask you another related question. This one, unfortunately, I'm betting that most of you are going to answer yes, but have you ever had to jump through a bunch of hoops to patch a critical vulnerability on a resource that wasn't directly accessible from the internet? I'm sure you have, right? And this can be an all hands on deck effort because of critical vulnerabilities, and especially if there's an active threat for it, if there's somebody exploiting that vulnerability, it becomes a huge effort, all hands on deck. People have to try and collect all the resources and do the mitigations to get rid of that critical vulnerability. Even though the risk might be low because it's not directly accessible from the internet, doesn't matter. It must be a priority. Now, can you imagine not having to worry about that? I think that matters, and that's part of what serverless can do for you. Now, let's look at it from a little bit of a different perspective, and that's the compliance perspective. There are 318 controls in the NIST 853 Rev 5 moderate framework. Limiting your list of compliance to 20 to 30% means that you're only responsible for 65 to 95 controls out of those 318. Now, somebody's going to be responsible for all 318, but you can transfer that risk and that cost and that effort to the cloud service provider because they've already done it, and then you inherit those controls from them, right? This possibly removes 223 to 253 controls from your list or somebody in your organization's list. From an organizational perspective, looking at the architecture, that matters, and that can have a big impact on your organization. Now, the results may vary, but compliance also really is a real value, and it depends on how secure by design, by default, you use those capabilities. So now I'm going to get to the part that's really fun to me. This is how we apply the architectural perspective of secure by design using serverless technologies and the traditional 3-tier model. And so this slide and the next slide, it's going to describe this 3-tier architecture that can dynamically scale resources throughout all 3 tiers. And it'll do it based off of utilization. It'll be doing it by managing thresholds, using minimum and maximum ranges to provide bookends for cost, for performance, and for cyber resilience. Now, this uses Lambda concurrency. It uses target tracking and application auto-scaling. And also uses RDS Aurora Serverless V2 auto-scaling. And it uses these to ensure that the application and the database tiers, that they can scale with demand from the presentation tier while maintaining performance, cost efficiency, and resiliency, as the application workload can fluctuate due to normal conditions or it can fluctuate due to a cyber attack. And you can scale in and out for that so that your customers don't realize that there's an attack going on. Now, a quick definition, because I just brought this up, Lambda provision concurrency. If you're not familiar with this, that's where AWS will pre-initialize these execution environments for Lambda functions to reduce latency. And by having that, you don't have that cold start latency, so you have better performance for your applications. So it's a really, it's a good feature for you to use. Now, remember back when I was talking about the bookends and a slide earlier, I discussed the cost and risks of new applications through the bookends of minimum and maximum. Well, this is a scenario where I designed a new SaaS application to handle up to 150 concurrent requests during peak hours. Now, to offset my costs, I decided to ensure low latency for the first 100 of those requests at any given time, but I also wanted to focus on maintaining about a 70% utilization for the provision concurrency usage to give me some flexibility on cost and scaling. And that's what this configuration that you're seeing is doing. First, it's registering a Lambda function in application autoscaling using provision concurrency as a scaling dimension. And then it creates a target tracking policy to maintain a 70% utilization of that provision concurrency. So this means that if my current utilization was at 35%, which is half of that target, then the result would be that the system would scale down to 50 provisional concurrent functions, which would reduce my cost because I'm not using them, I don't need them, so those drop down. Now, all of a sudden, if my current utilization jumps up to 95%, that's okay. Lambda will want to scale it to 129 because that's how the math works out, but it's capped at 100 because you don't want to go over that cost. You can modify that at any time if your cost parameters change or anything else changes, but here you can cap your costs. And so any requests over 100 would end up requiring what's called Lambda cold starts, which might induce a little bit of additional latency, but the application still performs, but you focused on the first 100 and you can balance that out. Also at the bottom of this policy, just so you know, I also added a 60-second cooldown period for the scale out actions, and then a 5-minute cooldown period for the scale in actions to prevent fracturing, which you definitely want to try and avoid. So this is a very simple, easy way to do minimum and maximums with thresholds to simplify your architecture and have it scale as you need for whether it's just normal dynamics of the application or for cyber resilience. Now, this is great for the application tier, but what about the database tier? Let's go take a look. So you can align your database tier along with the application tier. And in this scenario, you can see I just updated my minimum and maximum ACU. So that's your Aurora capacity units. And that's a mix of CPU memory and networking throughput. So I've set them to be 0.5 to 16. That's the range, the min and max for my read instances for read requests, right? And then I registered a scalable target so that I can automatically spin up new, the first one was for write instances. And then I can set the read replica for spinning up new read replicas to handle the increased DD read load. And so I can assign a scaling policy that will track the average CPU utilization and to target a 75% utilization rate. So that means that it helps me connect my application tier and my database tier, simplifying that app design, and also simplifying the troubleshooting process that uses predefined but adjustable metrics for target tracking and autoscaling. And then application autoscaling will try to maintain an average CPU utilization of 75% across all my read replicas. And it does this by scaling the reader instances up or down within that 0.5 to 16 ACU range so that I can have that flexibility in managing performance, cost, and risk. And like I said, I can modify it at any time if I need to. So now in addition to the CPU utilization metric, you can also use database connections metrics as well. So you have multiple metrics you can use on that. And this is also supported in DynamoDB and Elasticache as well. So these become very powerful tools to provide minimum and maximum ranges to simplify how you design your architecture. And it can also simplify your cognitive load and reduce your troubleshooting because the application, the whole stack of that application can scale up and down based off of utilization rates. And that's a great benefit for you. Now, I want to move on to a story, I guess I'm going to tell you. And this is something that had a huge impact on me because I witnessed something that I've never seen before in my life. And this really changed my perspective on the power of serverless primarily, but also the power of managed services with serverless in the cloud environment. And so here we're talking about FINRA. FINRA is the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. It's a nonprofit organization that regulates broker-dealers, and the securities industry. And one of the big parts of their mission is ingesting tons and tons of data to analyze market data, looking for illegal activity, fraud, and abuse. So the article that you see on the top left, this is just one of many articles from this time that were calling out how their cloud strategy, which was defined through an architectural perspective of defining how they design applications and infrastructure, right? And this perspective, it guided them to eliminate any non-differentiating commodity from their architecture so that they could focus on value. That was what they tried to do. And that led them to focusing on Lambda, S3, and EMR, Elastic MapReduce, managed architectures for some applications that were used to be able to check for fraud in markets. And this design, this perspective got them through some massive volatility in 2017 to 2018. And so let me give you a couple stats here as well. So in 2018, FINRA held 28 petabytes of data. And just so you can understand that, that is enough to play 40,000 years of music without repeating once. That's a lot of data that they collect. Now in 2017, they averaged 35 billion records that they process daily. By February of 2018, it jumped to 53 billion. So that's almost a double. Now on October 10th, it went to 107 billion records. And on October 11th, it went to 135 billion. This is a massive increase. These are big numbers. And I was an AWS architect during this time, and I was doing some work at FINRA, and I happened to be in their offices during this period in October of 2018. And that's what I'm saying. This had a profound effect on me because in any traditional organization or traditionally designed application, when your utilization doubles and then triples in a short period of time, I'm telling you, it'll be a hair on fire exercise just to keep the systems running, much less hoping that you're not going to lose data, right? It's a big deal. And I've been to some of these fires and they are not fun and they take a lot of time and they exhaust you. Now, this would have been a multi-week effort. One, to try and not lose any records. Two, to try and figure out how to get the system not to crash, and then try and figure out how it can catch up with all the processing it needs to do without losing data that's coming into the pipeline, because they're still getting every day more data coming in. It's a big deal and it's hard to do, but because of their architectural perspective, at FINRA, this was just another day. You know, the only reason that they really knew something was going on is because they had dashboards that they were measuring the volume and the data that was coming in. So that's how they knew. And as they realized what was happening, I remember that I took a look outside of the cubicles and down the hallways. I walked around the offices and it was crazy because everything was so wrong. And my past experience with issues like this, it's not normal. There's people running around trying to solve problems. There's voices raised. You get focused on trying to figure out these problems, and it has an impact on you. But it was surreal. They were just focusing on their daily activities. And so I came to a realization that day about the power of cloud, the power of serverless, and how architecture can truly have an impact on cognitive load, on the business outcomes, on firefighting, on all these things. And so my hope is that I can start helping and guiding other people to get to this place, right? And the place that we need to get to is this, where you can close that loop on firefighting because your architecture is designed to handle those fluctuations. You know, today, this includes taking an architectural perspective, using secure-by design principles. It also takes using serverless technologies designed with that concept of bookends in mind, so that you can reduce that cognitive load and the firefighting for your teams. And you can do this because the cloud providers have already built in security and flexibility and observability and performance and resilience and all these things into their services, so that you can get to a place where you're focused on the future. While you manage the operational metrics and pushing buttons and turning scalable knobs, you're not spending massive amounts of time troubleshooting or redeploying or on all hands to solve issues. You use the cloud provider's best practices. You focus on security, flexibility, observability, performance, and resilience. So hopefully you can be like this dude who's chilling in front of a green screen, focused on the future. So I really appreciate your time. I hope this was useful and informational to you. And thank you very much.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Techstrong.ai video series. I'm your host, Mike Bizarre. Today we're with David Pessis, who's Director for Gen AI for Amazon Q and Quick Site Business. Is that right?
You got it.
Excellent. There we go. And we're talking about how Amazon's internal developers are using Gen AI and Q specifically to kind of, well, make their life easier, build software faster, and maybe have generally less stress. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you. A pleasure to be here.
Your teams have been using this technology longer than anybody else. I'm sure they've had exposure to it before it was even formally launched. What have you guys seen now? I mean, as you look back from what your initial expectations were, what are you seeing among your developers? What kind of productivity gains are there? And what do you know now that you wish you knew then?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. In the beginning, our engineers, we like to eat our own dog food, right? And so as we're developing and building these products, our engineers are using these products to make sure that they're actually adding value and helping them be more productive. We started off with a Q Developer, which is our tool to enable developers write code, build code, update code faster. And more recently, what we're going to talk about here today is Q Business. Q Business is a generative AI-powered assistant that allows you to load very sophisticated technical documentation, large amounts of documentation, and allow the engineers to quickly get insights into that data much faster than they would be able to otherwise.
And a lot of the time, that is the thing that trips everybody up. It's that the requirements docs are somewhat off or skewed in a way that somebody didn't understand, and there's a lot of back and forth and time that gets wasted. And frankly, just that reduces the time to actually writing the code or creating the code that's driving the application. So how much of what we need to think about here when it comes to Gen AI might be beyond just code writing?
Yeah, so what happens is when you think about an organization like AWS, we have a lot of products. And a lot of these products are built on top of each other, right? That naturally happens. And there's a lot of really awesome documentation across a lot of these teams. It's impossible for these teams to have perfect communication with each other. And it's when you get to these larger organizations, it becomes a little more difficult to share information. But now what we did was we curated the best of the best technical documentation across every single organization in AWS. We loaded them into Q Business so that they were indexed. And now any engineer within AWS can ask a question, about any service internally and immediately get answers. And so instead of finding that principal engineer on the other side of the world that knows the details of this API, the engineer can ask that question and instantly get an answer to that question. We have fielded around 1 million questions from engineers over the last couple months, saving, the estimates are now 450,000 hours of dev time just by engineers instantly being able to get answers to those questions.
In a way, it sounds like you've captured the institutional knowledge and you're not dependent upon one developer being around who may at some point have left the company or maybe on vacation or at a Little League game or whatever it is. But does that kind of reduce the cognitive load for everybody involved? Because I'm not standing around waiting for somebody to answer my question, and that somebody may resent the question in the first place because they got other things to do.
It absolutely reduces the cognitive load. The other thing that you see happen is when you have a really strong engineer, everybody's always going to that engineer. How do I do this? How do I do that? And so when you have a workforce like ours that's distributed across many regions around the world, that dependency on that single engineer also becomes much easier. So the pressure is off of that engineer to talk to everybody. They're more efficient, and everybody else is more efficient because they can kind of capture that knowledge that's inside of that was inside of that engineer's brain. I would also say that I think what you asked earlier in this discussion, what have we learned? And really curating the best of the best documentation, making sure you're putting the best stuff in Q Business really helps deliver better results. And so that curation that we did, finding the best documentation across all of these areas and across these products, has really enabled us to build a really successful product to impact our engineers' productivity.
I mean, when you think about it, we kind of punish engineers for being great at their job because then we make them the ones that everybody wants to talk to, and then they can't actually go on and do anything else.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The best engineers get asked a lot of questions. That's just how it goes, and hopefully this helps. This helps everyone. Again, it helps the best engineers actually do more coding and do the things that they love, and helps the newer people ramping up get access to data that they could, frankly, never get access to before this quickly and this efficiently.
Has it become, or will it become, easier to also understand, like, if I change something and I change it in the documentation, can I understand the dependencies that might exist that I would not otherwise be aware of? And I might get some sort of alert that says, well, of course we can do that, but just realize that these 12 things downstream may change.
Yeah, so what happens is when you ask a question, so that document will go in the system. It will get indexed. But when you ask a question, Q Business will know which documents to weigh more based on recency, potentially, based on who is the person who uploaded the document. But when I get that answer, it'll say, hey, this is version 1 of the API. Heads up, here's version 2 of the API. It'll actually link both of those documents. It'll actually give the developer the insights that they need to see both versions. Now, the reason that's important is because of things like backwards compatibility, right? You don't want to eliminate that older documentation because people might be on that, but might still be using that version of the API. And so you need both, but you want the assistant to be smart enough so the end user knows that, hey, there's version A, version B. B is the more recent one. Make sure you're using this, but also be careful with version A. And that's how we solve a lot of these. And those references are built into the response given to the developer as they ask questions.
Will it also become simpler to stay current on different versions of things? So if I have, the latest version of Java, I'm be much more inclined to upgrade something because it won't be as big heavy a lift as it might otherwise have been in the past. And this is part of the reason why we have so many older versions of things that are less secure than we like, just because it was too big a heavy lift to modernize it.
That's exactly right. And so the pace at which we are able to update our code bases, you saw there was the article previously on Q Developer on how, I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but it was like 70,000 people hours updating code to the latest versions of Java. And that is so important, right? To get us to these later versions that are more secure, that are safer, less divergence in code bases, makes us just frankly more efficient and able to move even faster. And so this cumulative effect of getting all these code bases up to date, better code, more efficient code, and more consistent code across applications.
How smart will all this get? I mean, in my mind, we're starting to see the rise of these various types of AI agents, but how would that all get orchestrated across a complex set of tasks? I mean, if I look inside a queue, it seems like we're heading in that direction, but how do the agents all know about each other, and how do they tell us about what each one is doing?
Yeah, I think that it's very interesting times. It's very, very early in this journey. And I think this agent-based architecture where agents are talking to each other, multiple agents might be writing code, but then going to read the documentation of current architecture and going to continue to write code and find bugs. I think it's just the beginning. I think that orchestration layer is going to be critical. How do you make it so that our customers can feel safe and feel secure when these agents are potentially writing code and adjusting code? I think it's early. I think that the way that you make these the key to making this successful is these agents need to be able to talk to each other in a way that's safe and secure. That's super, super important, right? Like one agent can make changes to things that it doesn't have access to. And the way we're designing our systems from the ground up, safety and security first, is super important. And so that kind of lays the foundation for us to actually be able to build these systems and orchestrate these agents to build code. But again, it's just the beginning, Mike.
How have you seen the developers and software engineers respond to all of this? Because early on, at least, there was always a lot of concern or conversation about my job's going away, somebody's moving my cheese, and, you know, all kinds of bad things are going to happen. But as you get into it, where are they finding their joy?
Yeah, you know, one of the things that, you know, this is the saying that I like is you're not going to lose your job to generative AI. You're going to lose your job to the person next to you using generative AI. And what we believe is going to happen, it's going to make you much more efficient. It's going to make you better at your job. It's going to help you get things done that are boring and monotonous that developers don't like to do, such as writing documentation, looking up documentation, writing test cases. The Gen AI is going to just help them be more productive and more efficient so that most engineers can focus on the stuff that they love, and that's building new capabilities and building new features. And so, again, we think it's a productivity gainer, a force multiplier. And I think as the more and more engineers use these tools to help them be more productive, they're seeing that. And it's the way that they do business, right? You think about the late 90s, right? The internet became the way that you did business and the way that you built software. And today it's the same thing. Like, you're going to use generative AI to build software, and it's going to make you better and more efficient at your job.
Right. And a lot of that comes back to, there's a lot of aspects of being a developer or a software engineer where it's just not fun. It's a lot of maintenance work. It's a lot of technical debt. It's working through various updates to to-do lists, and all of that stuff kind of gets in the way. So, I mean, are we going to get to the point now where maybe not only are we writing code faster, but we're better at solving the problems because we're going to have more time to actually think about it?
Yeah, you know, some of the ways you'll hear people talk about it is, you know, the Gen AI is your buddy to bounce ideas off of, right? And now you can have thousands of these things to bounce ideas off of. And so I do think that, again, it's going to help eliminate the toil in your everyday job and help you do the things that you're really passionate about. And you're going to have a buddy to brainstorm with and work with and help you write code and help solve these problems in ways that I also think we can't imagine yet. And so it's super exciting. You know, I think the combination of things like Q Developer to help you write code and update code and secure your code, and Q Business to help you get access to knowledge that not that you never could before, but allow you to get access to knowledge faster than you ever could before and more efficiently than you ever could before, is going to change the way software is developed for a very long time.
So what is your best advice to folks about how to introduce all this into their organization? Do I just kind of like throw it over the wall and let them test and experiment, or is there a more rational kind of thought pattern or plan that I should be following?
I think if you look back, you know, late 23, early 24, even, by the way, that feels like in Gen AI years, that's like 50 years ago. But what people were doing was, to what you just said, opening it up and just dumping it on their organization and say, hey, go figure it out, go play with it. And that wasn't a good strategy. Part of it was resistance to using these tools. And part of it was just like, you know, it's hard. These tools are really changing behavior, and it's changing the way that people actually work. And so what we suggest is kind of three things. Number one, you need a strong leader within the organization that actually wants to do this. And so that you need that strong top-down leadership that's, hey, and that's, you know, we call it a sponsor. Make sure you have a strong sponsor. Number two is you got to start small. You know, find a specific problem or a specific engineering organization or a specific topic you might want to solve, and do that first, and get 10 to 20 power users in the room. And let's just say it's Q Business, right? And you wanted to do architecture for a specific product. Get those 20 engineers in the room, get them to load in their best documentation, and get out all the kinks. Make sure this thing is working, get some success. And then that's when you begin expanding throughout the organization. But start small, get some wins, figure out how to change the behavior, figure out how it's making you better at your job before you go big. it's not if you build it, they will come. You got to lean in right now and actually set the organization up for success.
All right, folks, you heard it here. It's important to play, but you got to have a plan ultimately. Otherwise, it'll just get lost in the cycles because people will be doing all kinds of things that may not be all that productive, or they may be just spinning their wheels one way or another. I think it was Ben Franklin said something about, failing the plan is planning to fail.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Still true in the land of AI. Hey, David, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you all for watching the latest episode of the Techstrong.ai video series. You can find this episode and others on our website. We invite you to check them all out. Until then, we'll see you next time.
All right. Hello and welcome everyone to the 5G Factor. I'm Ron Westfall, Research Director here at the Futurum Group. And I'm excited about today's episode because my distinguished colleague, Tom Hollingsworth, the networking nerd and event lead at Tech Field Day, will be joining me. And this has been pretty consistent. It's always a pleasure to be co-hosting with Tom. And Tom, how are you coming along since our last recording? What's new?
We've been busy getting prepped for our next event coming up next week. So I've been heads down taking a lot of briefings. There were some earnings reports that came out this week that had everybody kind of excited. So I'm looking forward to a chance to talk about some of the stuff that we've seen over the last week and maybe educate some of our listeners out there about some of the cool stuff happening.
Yes, and I think this is also an opportunity to talk about what we've been working on this week, and that is Networking Field Day 36. It's November 6th and 7th after Election Day, and we're very intrigued and excited about the lineup because it includes Arista Networks, Itential, Path Solutions, Elicity, and the Bees Networks. So it's a pretty compelling combination, I think, of startups, independents, and, well, Arista Networks has graduated to, a public traded company that's mature. Anything to add, Tom, about what's going on with Networking Field Day next week?
Well, we're excited to be hearing from first-time presenters like Elicity and Meter, of course, because they're doing some interesting stuff in the marketplace. But like you said, some of the companies that have been around for a while, we want to get an update on what they're working on. And I've been told there's going to be at least 2 different product launches that are going to be happening during the event. I can't say any more, but you should definitely tune in.
That's perfect. Rounding it out with the Meter and Elicity, all of these companies, all 6 of them, just that. They are going to be coming out with, I think, very insightful information for all of us. But I think it's a testament that companies are launching, coming out with press releases to align with Tech Field Day. So what's not to like? And with that, let's dive into the 5G factor itself because we have a lot of ground to cover. And I want to start with something that has been pressing. That certainly came out at the recent 5G Americas event. When talking, at least with the top tier operators such as T-Mobile and AT&T, one thing that is keeping them up at night some, that is driving the key decision makers, is what to do about spectrum. Now, this is not unique to this time frame, but I think it's becoming more acute. And part of the reason is that the U.S. does not have an updated, comprehensive national spectrum plan in place. And that's why I thought it was notable, in terms of, okay, we see T-Mobile, AT&T, and other operators really knocking on the door of the U.S. government, say, hey, we need to fix this. We need to figure out ways to improve our spectrum situation because scarcity is going to impact, at the end of the day, the quality of 5G services. It's going to make a difference in how effectively the operators can not only compete, but certainly serve customers. So the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy released the National Spectrum Research and Development Plan. And this new plan will serve as a tool basically to guide government decisions on spectrum-related research, shape private sector efforts, and provide a shared reference for stakeholders. And the overall goal is to, make sure that the U.S. can claim leadership when it comes to spectrum R&D. And certainly China comes to mind when this goal is, spotlighted. And specifically, the plan identified opportunities for spectrum-related R&D in 4 categories. And for example, one is innovation areas for use-inspired research, which is, I think, important because it's being driven by likely operational spectrum use cases. That is, let's link the R&D more closely to where it will actually make a difference, where it will actually make use cases, real. And these are often linked to specific frequency bands, normally placing high importance on cost effectiveness and also potentially coupling it with specific application needs or constraints. We on the last 5G factor, on the recent 5G factor, talked about how band 14 was vital to enabling AT&T to support, the public safety critical infrastructure out there across an LTE network. And so we're anticipating more of the same. It also informs the overall national spectrum strategy that recognizes the spectrum needs of the mobile network operators, and that includes the lower 3 gigahertz and 7 gigahertz bands for more study and potential repurposing for full powered license use. And so this is, basically the level set as to why spectrum policy is important, why spectrum R&D is vital. And Tom, from your view, what are you seeing here that can be a difference maker? That is like, this is something that could actually help.
I think that the big thing is that the government is pushing them to do use-inspired research, right? Like, this is no longer just a situation where they're going to be putting up spectrum blocks for auction and then hoping that somebody's going to do something with them. And we've seen this recently in the millimeter wave bands, where some of the companies are starting to give those back because, it turns out we really didn't have a plan for these all along. We just wanted to buy them because they were there. It's the same problem that I have when I go to the store and I'm like, oh, this thing's on sale. I should probably buy it. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but it's on sale and I should buy it. And now that's not going to work out because what you end up, in my case, you end up with a garage full of junk. But if you're a provider, you're ending up with a virtual garage full of spectrum that you can't really do anything with because it's not contiguous. You don't have any idea of how it's going to work. And so what the government's basically saying now is, let's take a step back. Let's make sure you have a use for it before you go off and buy it. And we want to we see those things. And we're going to give you accelerators to do R&D in it, because before it was as much about denying it to other providers as it was being able to do anything with it. Well, now I'm going to give you money if you actually do something with it. And that's kind of the kick in the pants that some of these providers need to just kind of, get off their laurels and get it done. And then the other thing is, when you look at the fact that they want to do dynamic spectrum sharing, where you're trying to pull together all of these resources and dynamically adjust so that more users can get on at the same time. Anybody who's ever gone to like a sporting event or been in a hospital knows that the more users that you get in the given area, the less performant your system is. And so they're wanting to investigate doing things like maybe tuning the antennas a little bit more, doing better noise accommodation, because everything now has a much higher noise floor than it used to because of all of the devices that are out there transmitting. And then even using things like digital twins to be able to kind of do modeling of the system to make those changes more impactful when they actually do put them out, as opposed to just clicking a knob or pushing a button and going, well, I hope that worked.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. And so could the mobile operators. There's that buyer's remorse scenario that played out with the millimeter wave. And I think there's about a 4-year window where the mobile operators are sweating about the spectrum scarcity. In fact, at 5G Americas, AT&T and T-Mobile were pretty consistent and persistent about, we are facing a spectrum scarcity situation where the innovation is actually working with, new companies or whoever can solve, how to optimize spectrum, how to, again, have spectrum sharing enabled with the resources that exist. And that's why they're so on board with, okay, let's have a national spectrum plan that is more rational. That's, linked to R&D being based on, use case outcomes versus, the highest bidder. And I think that's going to correlate with correcting the mid-band spectrum imbalances that are out there. And that means that the mobile connectivity is no longer going to be so dependent on on auction outcomes. I think we've seen the results are decidedly mixed, where they can just result in this stranded spectrum scenarios, and it's not helping anybody. And so as a result, I think this is something that will be welcomed. I don't think there's going to be any partisan issues when it comes to, okay, let's have a new, improved national spectrum plan in place, and hopefully it won't cause this, 4-year window of sweating for, the U.S. mobile operators. And that's something that I think will happen. But again, government isn't exactly rapid in its decision making. But I think these are very important steps to avoid, some unfortunate scenarios. And with that is leading into our second topic, and that is networks that are programmable. Ericsson came out with I think a very important announcement, and that is its new 5G advanced software offering. So emphasis on the software part here. And there are 3 key factors to this new Ericsson push. That is, first, it's looking at high-performing programmable networks that are designed to enable operators to better align that networks to improve business outcomes. So that was a constant theme at 5G Americas. It's not so much about technical issues, although that's still out there, as we see with spectrum sharing and scarcity concerns. But also next, they came out with 7 new 5G advanced software products for high-performing programmable network needs. And that, again, can help with the revenue diversification, improving the user experience, and also overall operational efficiency. And finally, 5G Advanced strengthens RAN software portfolio of theirs with technologies such as AI-powered RAN, intent-driven networks, and service-aware RAN. Now, this is something we've been talking about for a while, but I think we're definitely getting closer to achieving these goals. We saw Ericsson partner with Nokia and naturally NVIDIA, as well as T-Mobile, to come out with the AI RAN Innovation Center. So this is, where they're putting, money on the table to really make some of these capabilities happen on the AI RAN side. But the programmability is definitely tied into this. For example, among these 7 new features is real-time AI-powered automation. And again, they're linked at the hip, AI being able to advance automation, and it can certainly occur across RAN implementations. And that is to, enable operators to scale more efficiently, handle more complex scenarios, and it's quite simply keep up with the demands out there. And why not use AI to keep up with, say, being able to offer AI as a service, enabling AI inferencing at the edge using their assets. And as a note, this new set of software products will be available between this quarter and also the first quarter of 25. So this is around the corner. This is something that we'll be seeing in production work certainly in 25. And with that, Tom, what do you see about network programmability that's different this time? It's been talked about for a while. Do you see this Ericsson announcement as really pushing these capabilities forward across the 5G ecosystem?
I think I do. And part of it comes from the fact that we've spent so much time kind of deploying these 5G assets out there just so that we can do these kinds of things. When you look back at the history of mobile operators, even LTE was kind of this customized, cobbled together system that mostly worked a lot of the time, but sometimes it didn't. And man, I hope we can make this work. But really, by building this on more commodity hardware, by building this with more off-the-shelf software, we're able to kind of move some of these developments that have been taking place in the networking arena into 5G. The one that kind of stood out to me was intent-based networking. If you're not familiar with the ideas behind intent-based networking, it's real easy. You go in and you say, I want the network to do X. And then it's up to the software to figure out how to configure the network to accomplish the business goal. So no longer do you have to think in things like VLANs or, border routers. Instead, you think in business goals, business units, subscriber units, cells, things like that. And you can make it more declarative by saying, I want to see X. and then let the software go out and take care of that. And by using more AI-driven functionality, it can even adjust on the fly. So you can set things like minimum thresholds. If user quality falls below a certain metric, then, bring these other assets online or shunt people to other towers or, whatever it happens to be. And more importantly, energy efficiency is something you and I have talked about a lot across a variety of things that we've been doing. Is most people don't understand how much it costs to keep the lights on at one of these places, across all of the devices that they're using. So if they can slip into a lower power mode or kind of more focused in times when there's less load, I don't know, 5 a.m., there's not a whole lot of people jumping on the towers. So if I can reduce usage during that time, that provides me with cost savings, that could not have been realized any other way. So I think that Ericsson's onto something here. And by positioning this to the service provider market, what they're saying is that we're the best partner to go with because we not only give you better technology, but we help you save money to implement more of those features. And I think that's something that's going to be valuable as people start looking at the bottom line of these subscription services is how can I get the most performance for the least amount of investment?
Yes. And I think it will also boost the network API proposition out there. Networks that are programmable will just be more flexible and agile and be able to use APIs to, address a fast emerging use case to allow developers to, inject more innovation into the service offerings. And it's pushing forward to this ultimate goal of autonomous networks. And I think it's somewhat running in parallel with, say, autonomous vehicles. Yes, it's a great vision, but it's a journey. It's going to require some blood, sweat, and tears to get to it, and it's going to take some time. However, I think announcements like this are indicating that we're getting closer in a meaningful way, that, hopefully that natural language prompts can actually make the intent-based networking capabilities, applicable in the real world. And this is tying into our next area of focus, and that is a company, Wilson Connectivity, that just recently rebranded itself. It had been Wilson Electronics for many years. It had actually started off about a quarter century ago, speaking of vehicles, enabling radio connectivity on vehicles and being able to track them. But now they have definitely expanded their portfolio. They have matured. And what they're doing is taking an approach that allows customers to support both the public existing networks as well as private networks on a unified, power-efficient wireless infrastructure. Again, that power efficiency factor is spotlighted. And I think this is linking closely to, the TM Forum's objective of enabling autonomous networks in production environments. And that means, zero weight, zero touch, zero trouble. I know the term zero can be viewed as overhyping it. However, it gets the idea across. All of these capabilities will just be a lot more efficiently implemented and, well, quite simply, more user-friendly. And that it aligns with zero trust security. So here is, I think, the tiebreaker. It's okay, you can have very compelling AI engines. You have, really cool chat boxes. But does the data that's out there within these organizations managed, where they can be trained and then, fine-tune and align to enable something like an autonomous network that includes certainly a private 5G component, and also supporting the SLAs and so forth that come with a private 5G network offering, regardless of who is providing it. And so what I think is also different about Wilson Connectivity is that they're combining, DAS solutions with the capabilities of private 5G. And I think that's something that's going to be increasing demand because there's just a lot of distributed antenna technology out there. It's a classical brownfield environment. People who are going to implement private 5G will want it to work, but it's already in place and already not broken. And that certainly includes distributed antenna systems, but also includes, Wi-Fi. And that was something that was a key takeaway at the 5G Americas event, is that there's going to be a big demand, we believe, for unified observability and management platforms that can allow an organization or operator to know what's going on with the Wi-Fi network, with the private 5G network, with the DAS implementation, you name it. Whatever the combination that's needed is required. And I think what's also important to note is that Wilson's DAS solutions can distribute RF sources from the 150 megahertz range all the way up to 5 gigahertz. So within today's private 5G environments, that will certainly be helpful. And so with that, from this, Wilson connectivity rebranding and, emphasizing, combining these capabilities, Tom, what do you see here that could help, catalyze private 5G implementations?
Honestly, I think this is a good move for them, because one of the issues that you run into with companies that are very well known for doing one thing, like DAS, is that becomes associated with that company very directly. And so in order to kind of get the new capabilities out there, you really do have to remind people, oh, by the way, we're going to do something new, so we probably need to change the name. It's like, remember when IHOP tried to rebrand as the International House of Burgers, and everyone's like, yeah, but you're IHOP. This is kind of the opposite of that, right? Like they want people to know that they're doing more. And I think that you can't just get by on a DAS system anymore. You have to have these new capabilities. You honestly have to be the one-stop shop to do this. I mean, I'm assuming that most of the people who listen to the 5G Factor are familiar with distributed antenna systems. If not, quick Google will tell you these are the kinds of things where they basically drop a cellular site on top of a hospital roof so that you can get cell coverage inside of the hospital. Except now, with the advent of things like guest Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi calling, they're less valuable and necessary, and they're definitely not worth the money that you're paying for them. Because these are not things you typically manage by yourself. You have somebody to manage them for you. So for the companies like Wilson that are trying to offer these services still, they're trying to get it to the point where they can still continue to make those high margin revenues while providing more than just, we'll make the cell phones work inside of the hospital. And so that's why, doing things like power consumption monitoring and things like that, or providing that kind of service for an outdoor area is so valuable. And one of the other things that you have to understand for a lot of these things coming out now, these IoT devices, I reference medical a lot because that's still where you see a lot of DAS implementations. Think about the number of devices that are getting put on networks in hospitals now that have functionality that is either, very small, low-powered Wi-Fi, or in some cases even cellular capable. You really need to have good connectivity. And I think that that's the value of what a company like Wilson can bring to the table, provided they can get people to understand that they're doing more than just doing DAS.
Yes, and I think that's a very critical point, Tom. There's still an education component here. Yes, there are plenty of folks who are familiar with wireless implementations and they're comfortable with Wi-Fi. They might even have private LTE, and that's certainly a part of the mix here. But at the end of the day, it's about, okay, why, private 5G? And I think it's aligns with, those indoor-outdoor scenarios. Campuses are a great example. It could be a hospital campus, could be a college campus, a industrial campus. And yes, for the carpeted areas, the Wi-Fi can work very suitably. And in some limited scenarios, it can also work even on an outdoor basis. But we're talking about the flexibility of a 5G network. You have to have it in places where, like, it's a mining operation or energy exploration. There's just no way around it. Wi-Fi cannot simply meet those scenarios. Plus, it's a matter of fleets and other, things that are integral to so many organizations. You need Wi-Fi for, being able to support that part of the organization. And that's, I think, why Wilson Connectivity, as well as players like Salona, are in a prime position to take advantage of this burgeoning demand in this area. And they're going to be able to ride on private 5G coattails, which will expand. Again, it went through a hype cycle like so many other technologies that are new on the scene, and it got overhyped. And now folks are like, really, private 5G? But believe me, these private 5G implementations are expanding on a daily basis. People have kicked the tires more. There's more awareness. The capabilities have improved. There's solutions that are more streamlined. So, there's less complexity involved. And AI is assisting in this regard. And that includes, for example, the Ericsson announcement. Programmability can help with optimizing outdoor siting for a private 5G network implementation, as an example. And so with that, on that up note, I guess we can call it. I appreciate everybody for joining today's 5G Factor. Tom, once again, always a pleasure to have you on to talk things 5G.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure to be here, Ron. And, there's always really good stuff coming out of the industry if you know where to look for it. And I'm always happy to jump on and discuss all of those cool things with you. So make sure you stay tuned to Networking Field Day. Next week, we're going to have some great presentations from the presenters out there. And some of this is technology that you'll probably be seeing coming to a 5G network before you know it.
Right on. Yes. Networking Field Day. It's on Tech Field Day site, the Futurum Group website. Check it out. Just like the 5G Factor itself, please bookmark it. And also, we're on Techstrong TV. What's not to like? We just have so many ways that you can check out our perspectives and what's going on. That's very important in not just the 5G ecosystem, but on Tech Field Day, what's going on in the overall networking industry. It's all interrelated. And again, thank you everyone for joining. Have a great 5G and private 5G day for that matter.